always used to lay you clean up the messes. Down on my knees, thought I couldn't stand up on my own. Turns out sometimes you're stronger alone.
My name is Daniel. I am 30 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I am shunned.
All right, Daniel. So how'd you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
I was born in. I am fourth generation on my mother's side.
Ooh.
And third generation on my dad's side. So it's just always been the status quo growing up. And yeah, had no choice.
Yeah, not much choice when it goes back that deep.
No.
Do you know anything about the origin? Was there an origin story that people passed down through the generations?
I know a little bit. So my mother's from Germany, the south of Germany, and apparently her grandparents became Jehovah's Witnesses more or less like right after the Second World War. Because my great grandfather he fought in Second World War, and he ended up in an internment camp. Internment camp, is that the right word? Like a kind of concentration camp situation in Russia. All the while, like, they're crazy stories to be told about those people, but my great grandmother in Germany, who obviously stayed in Germany, she like hid an American pilot, and like there was all this crazy stuff going on. So they were very much like worldly people then, but at some point after the war, I don't know exactly when, but yeah, they became Jehovah's Witnesses. And on my father's side, I know that my dad wasn't born in, but I think when he was 6 or 7, that ballpark age, his mother started studying. And then I think my grandfather was opposed initially, but then he joined. So all I've ever known is like Jehovah's Witness grandparents, uncles, aunts. I never knew my great grandparents, but even my great grandparents were in. So it was very deeply entrenched.
Gotcha. And did you have a big family that was in? I mean, aside from those people, like, did you have a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins around or anything growing up? Did you have a lot of those people around you?
So my father has 5 siblings, and of them, they were all raised in the truth. Some of them left, 2 of them left, but even growing up, the other 4 siblings were all in, and they all had many children. So my dad's from America, from upstate New York, and we moved to Massachusetts. Well, they moved to Massachusetts before I was born, but most of my relatives were still either in New York, or some of them were in Alaska as well. So they weren't always immediately around us, but we saw them. Actually growing up, some of his brothers were around the first few years of my life. So there were plenty of cousins. And my German family, I never saw much of. They came to visit maybe once or twice in the 11, 12 years I spent in the States, but I didn't see much of them. But they were all, my mother had 2 siblings, and they had children as well. So it was like a fairly large family combined. Lots of aunts and uncles and cousins. Pardon?
And all witnesses for the most part.
Yeah. Some fell off later on, but growing up, virtually everyone was in. Yeah.
Wow. So, growing up that way, and with such depth in your family, what was the worldview that it gave you as a little kid, kind of growing up in this environment where you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and so is everybody that kind of matters to you?
Yeah, it is like your whole worldview, and you have the classic kind of, even as a kid, thinking your friends at school are going to die in Armageddon. And I don't think I ever told any kids that they were going to die in Armageddon, because I've heard of people doing that. I don't know, maybe I was like a tactful 6-year-old, but I definitely had this judgmental sense of like, everybody's doing bad things, even little kids, and I'm doing the right thing. And I thought, I mean, obviously as a kid, especially, you think it's reality, you think it's the truth. It's what your parents present to you. It's what your family kind of represents. But I do remember from a very young age having this sense of just the world being very attractive to me, and like I'm sure we'll get into this, but like growing up, especially my father was very authoritarian and author is that the word?
Yeah, that sounds
And
right.
authoritative. Yeah, I think that's right. Very disciplinarian. And I think having such like strict rules growing up, which are obviously also inherent to the cult anyway,
Hmm.
I just really envied a lot of my peers at school just for the lives that they had. And I I mean, we had no television. We only had VHS videos, and they were all PG or under. So I remember growing up, all I wanted as a kid was to watch Titanic, because one of my good friends, she was a witness as well, but like her favorite movie was Titanic with Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio, and I was never allowed to watch that. And then there's a lot of music we weren't allowed to listen to. So there was always this sense of like thinking it was the truth, but almost kind of wishing it hadn't happened to me, because it felt like my life was so limited. And that was not even as a teenager, that was as a 6, 7, 8 year old at school.
So,
Yeah.
what was attractive to you about those other kids and their life? Was it just that they had the freedom to watch television, to engage in entertainment, to do these things that you were so restricted from?
Yeah, I guess especially as a kid, you can't help but like look at what everyone else has and feel
Yeah.
like you're missing out. And I think the religion went hand in hand with us also being quite poor. So there was never money for nice toys or like going out to restaurants or going on vacations. So there's this dual thing of like the religion itself being very limiting, but then also even within the congregation, I felt like my family was the financially limited as well, because I had friends, obviously we didn't celebrate Christmas, but some of my friends in the hall, they would do like a snow day, which was their snow day Christmas, and their parents would get them all these new toys, and it was basically their Christmas with a different name, and it was in like, I don't know, November or something. But yeah, just this sense of like, I don't have anything I want, which wasn't true because our lives were fine. Like we weren't deprived of things, but there was a lot that I just desired and that I was drawn to and that I couldn't have or engage with. I think from a young age, I had a very keen kind of, I was very drawn to like pop culture. And I remember in the first grade, I was sitting next to a girl and she opened her desk, one of those like American style desks
Hmm.
where you have all your stuff inside. And she pulled out this notebook, and it was a Britney Spears notebook, and it had Britney Spears on the cover. And I had no clue who Britney Spears was, but I just remember looking over and it was like this pop epiphany or something, like seeing this pop star on a notebook. And I was just instantly drawn to Britney Spears, but also just the idea of a pop star. And I guess that transferred as well to Barbies and dolls and whatever, all things that I wasn't allowed to have. Not even my sister was allowed to have a Barbie doll. So yeah, it was kind of, and also what kids wore to school, again, all things we couldn't afford, but probably would have been discouraged anyway. But when I was growing up, it was like, I mean, I know Nike is still a huge brand, but like the cool kids wore Nike or Fubu, like all these kind of cool brands, and we couldn't even afford them. But then I think obviously there's quite a culture of discouraging any kind of materialism. So maybe even if we could have, it would have been discouraged to wear any kind of like trendy brands. But yeah, just drawn to all the things that I couldn't have and I wasn't allowed to have. And that, yeah, I guess I
Yeah.
wanted
So,
to be a part of things and I wanted to express myself. And that was just very limited.
yeah. So there is a, while you had, I'm sure, food and clothing, and you were not deprived of some of the basic necessities, there is a deprivation as far as it goes when it comes to self-expression or the freedom of choice to get involved in things that are, I don't know, shiny and fun and new, especially when
Yeah.
you're a kid. That's part of being a kid. It's part of the joy of being a kid is to get swept up in Britney Spears or, I mean, adults do too, but whatever. It's just to get swept up in things. That's part of the
Yeah.
fun and the free expression of being a child.
Yeah, and you're piecing together your identity,
Yeah,
obviously. And like you don't
trying things.
obviously for us so much was like prescribed as to who we were supposed
Mhm.
to be. And but there was so much about me that like or so much in me that related to those things, but they felt kind of out of reach.
Yeah, it's like being on the outside looking in, isn't it?
Yeah, fully, yeah. And then I got on with kids quite well, and like I wasn't unpopular at school, so it was kind of hard kind of negotiating where kind of the cutoff is and realizing like, oh, I am liked and I get on with people and I have friends, but only so far, and obviously that transfers to the whole idea of just friendship. Like as a kid growing up as Joe's Witness, you're limited to the kids in your hall or at most the kids in your circuit, but you have all these kids, like hundreds of kids at school that you're drawn to and you like, and you can have these mini friendships for like from 9 till 3 every day, but that's where they remain. So yeah.
Yeah, and don't talk about them afterward, right?
No, yeah, definitely don't invite them to your house or go to their house.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
And so school then, it sounds like you were making some, well, we'll call them friends because I think that's what normal people do, but Jehovah's Witnesses would call them acquaintances because you're
Yeah.
not really allowed to be, quote, friends with them, but you were wanting to be friends with them and you were friends when you could spend time with them. So it does sound like you at least had some people at school that, like your experience at school, you were able to have some fun with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think most of my friends were girls. There were always like little cliques of boys. So I tried to penetrate that circle a bit. And I would do it a little and I kind of be on the periphery, but I think I had an effeminacy about me as well, which just didn't, and I wasn't great at sports. It's funny now because I'm very like active and do lots of different things like athletically, but back then I couldn't catch a football for the life of me. And I think I just got in my head too much, but yeah, I there were always these groups of boys that I thought they were cool. Maybe I low key had a crush on some of them, and but my like main friends were usually girls. There was a lot of kind of common ground there. But
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
the friends, yeah, I didn't have friends in the hall generally. They were more acquaintances, like people you had to like try to get on with and try to enjoy yourself with. But even in that department, it always just felt like I just I was bored and they didn't stimulate me. you know, yeah.
Sure. Can I ask, so going from school to, let's say, at the Kingdom Hall, in that environment, you say you didn't have a lot of friends. Is any of that because, I don't know how your Kingdom Hall is, and maybe I can't speak for everyone, but in a lot of them, males and female mixed friendships are highly discouraged.
Yeah.
They can't see anything, even a little boy and little girl getting together and hanging out. Like they can't see anything like that without sexualizing it.
Yeah,
and
it's
and
true.
so that's often a barrier. So if you were having a lot of friends at school that were girls, and that's maybe who you got along with better, might that have been a reason or a hindrance at the hall as well? Because probably you weren't going to be allowed to be friends with those little girls?
Yeah, probably. I think I've never thought about that much, but looking back, that probably was a factor. So I lived in Colorado from the age of 4 to 7, and I had a friend there who was a girl, and she was the one who loved Titanic, and she had this
Oh,
crazy Barbie collection. And we lived in a kind of trailer. It wasn't a trailer park, but like in the town I lived in, most people had like kind of double wide trailers, and they lived just like a few streets away from us. So I went over there a lot. But I do, like, looking back, I feel like there was this idea that I shouldn't spend too much time with her. And that, yeah, I mean, I know growing up, my dad he actively tried to discourage my effeminate side, I guess, and like wanting to play with Barbies, wanting to dress up, stuff like that. So maybe that was also part of this, like Daniel's playing with this girl too much. Daniel's going over to play with Barbies and like watch Disney movies and stuff. So, but yeah, I think that was definitely a part of it. I remember after we moved back to the East Coast and lived on Nantucket Island for a while, I had a friend there who I'd grown up with until I was 4. And I think we were really close. Again, another girl. And I remember there was this really weird experience with her. Again, how old was I? 7 or 8. She had a new baby doll. And it was one of those like really realistic baby dolls that has like a little like penis basically, or like sounds kind of weird now looking back, but I just remember she had this brand new doll.
sure.
And I was just curious.
Some baby
like,
dolls
he
are
was
pretty
a
weird.
boy. What?
I said some baby dolls are pretty weird.
I know. I'm just remembering this now, but I remember I would go over to her house. We play together a lot, and she had this doll, and it was a brand new doll, and she was like, "It's got all the parts. Oh my goodness!" And he had a diaper on. I just really wanted to see. I was like, I want to see this anatomy of this doll, and she just wouldn't let me see it, and we really fell out about it. And then I was sent home, and I was never allowed to play with her again. And our friendship was just over. And apparently our mothers had this chat about, again, really sexualizing the situation of me just being curious about like anatomy, I don't know why that's just come to me, but it was weird. Again, very like Jehovah's Witness vibes, sadly. And yeah, so those two girls were like my like main gals growing up. But then we moved away from Colorado, so I never saw the first one again. But then this other friend as well, like that friendship was just kind of stopped in its tracks by this really strange thing, as if I was like a pervy 8-year-old or something. Like I remember feeling a lot of shame about that. And like, I think my mom definitely defended me, but according to her mom, I was like being gross and out of line, and I never should have behaved that way.
Instead of just
Anyway,
being a normal, curious kid.
I know. Again, that just kind of shows this climate of like, there's so many taboos growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I had the advantage of growing up in a family where at least my mom was quite transparent about things when it came to like your body and sexuality, and obviously only certain kinds of sexuality. But I think many families, they just have like a real issue with being honest about, kids' curiosity and what happens to your body through puberty and stuff like that. Like, it's just another symptom of that climate of you don't talk about this. This is taboo. It's a loss of innocence to like take a doll's diaper off, apparently. But yeah, the friendships, yeah. And then I had friends who were boys, but sometimes it just felt like they only went so deep. And I guess as a kid, I just probably wasn't having much fun spending time with them. And yeah, I had more fun at school.
Gotcha. Now, were you all the family that was at all the meetings and doing all the things? And we'll get to your family dynamic inside the home in a minute, but at the Kingdom Hall, I mean, were you all that family that was always there? And then are you, how did you feel? It sounds like you felt understimulated by the people there as far as making friends.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy any of it, or was it all just drudgery for you?
So my family was definitely that like very spiritual family. My parents were kind of like spiritual superstars. Um, that sounds so cringe, but in it, like there is definitely this weird unspoken hierarchy in that organization. And so the way my parents met was that they met in Germany. My father had been a missionary, like a solo missionary in Nigeria. He had been a Bethelite, like special pioneer, been through Gilead. He ended up in Nigeria, and he'd been there for a few years when he contracted malaria and was sent to Selters, which is the big Bethel in Germany, which I think is now like the headquarters for all of Europe. But at the time, they were responsible for Africa, I think. So when he got ill, he was sent to Selters. And while he was there, this matchmaking elderly couple put him in touch with my mother, and they started writing letters and then eventually dating or courting. And I think they were married within like 8 months or something. It was a very fast turnaround, and then went straight back to Africa. I think they had like a 3-day honeymoon. And then my mom went with my dad. They were in Ivory Coast as missionaries, and then eventually moved to the States, had kids, etc. But then even having a family, my dad he was an elder. He was giving talks at the district conventions. So very respected as a witness and a brother. And that was kind of, I think growing up, there was an immense pressure, again, back to that, like the appearance thing as witnesses, like we had to be an exemplary family. And so when we're all at all meetings at all times, it was hard to get out of them. I remember because my mom was chronically ill, so she would miss meetings, not constantly, but like every once in a while. And as a kid, I just always wanted to stay home with her. So I always kind of tried to make up some cough or sore throat or something. But I think more often than not, I was sent along. So very, committed to the meetings and ministry every Saturday morning. Very exemplary family.
Well, yeah, I
And
mean, your dad was a Bethelite, a Gilead graduate, a missionary in Africa. That is, I mean, other than being a governing body member, or I don't know, like that's a lot, and that's gonna, in the hierarchy, everybody's gonna look at your family a certain way, which must have put a tremendous amount of pressure on you to perform. And I don't know, do you have any siblings, or is it just you?
yeah, I have 3 siblings, so
Oh,
big family. Yeah.
so how many
And
brothers, sisters? Where are you in the order? What's that?
so I have a sister who's 2.5 years older than me. I'm 30 now. And then my brothers are 2 years younger than me and 5 years younger than me. So all quite like narrow time span to have had 4 kids as well, all within 8 years. And yeah,
So you almost
it,
had a lot of pressure then to be exemplary, because
yeah,
I mean that's just who your parents had been.
yeah. And yeah, and it played into our family dynamic a lot as well, because my father wasn't a kind person behind the scenes, but he was, I don't know if he was loved by people, because I think on a more personal level, lots of people kind of avoided our family because of my dad. And we found out about this later, like we wouldn't be invited to things, or just because he made social situations quite difficult and awkward and people didn't get on with him. But on a spiritual level, he was that brother. He was like the best speaker. He was doing all the things. So yeah, I think there was pressure to perform and be a certain way. And I don't know if I even like identified it as a kid as like, oh, this is so pressurized for me, but it was definitely part of the environment and the climate, I guess.
Well, when it's your norm and it's all you've ever experienced, it may be something that does carry a lot of weight or pressure with it, but it's just that's normal for you. And so you
Hmm.
may not have realized all the pressure that you were even feeling inside just because this is just how it is. It's life, right? There's certain expectations to be met or whatever the case is, and you just do
Yeah,
your thing.
it's just kind of enmeshed in that overall
Yeah.
lifestyle, I guess. Like, but it's not, as we all know, like it's not fair for kids to feel that growing up.
No.
They should worry about school and like getting good grades and having friends and having fun, not like performing. And I guess I started doing readings when I was, I think, 6 from the stage, and my sister was baptized when she was 11, and that was like in my head. Obviously I was 2.5 years younger than her, but I was like, I need to get baptized by the time I'm 11, because nothing to do with Jehovah, obviously. It was just this kind of spiritual competition. Like, it felt, because we did well at school, and like I didn't have to try to do well at school. I think I just had that kind of mind where I absorbed things, and probably had a lot of like knowledge from home as well, because my parents were very switched on in a kind of educational way. Um, but I guess like that kind of ambition at school to have the best grades, it just transferred to the hall as well in this kind of way. I want to be reading from the stage as soon as possible. I want to have privileges. I want to get baptized. Again, not because I love Jehovah, but because it's part of this social hierarchy that I want to climb. And again, as a kid, to be thinking that way is kind of disturbing.
Well, yeah, you should just be having fun and playing. I mean, kids have plenty to think about anyway, just in growing up, what it is to be an adolescent and to have changing bodies and all the things over the years.
Yeah.
There's plenty to think about without all of that mess too. Can I ask, so you all, one would think that everybody would want to have the former missionaries and their kids at all their parties. Because of the hierarchy, it can make people feel special. I'm just wondering, um, because you've kind of alluded to your dad being pretty authoritarian and kind of that with that usually comes a lot of rigidity, some judgments, things like that. Was it possible that maybe one of the reasons you all weren't invited to a lot of things, like, did inviting him bring a lot of pressure? Oh no, he's
Yeah.
gonna come and tell us we're all doing it wrong, and we don't want that.
Yep. That's a good point. Yeah. Because I feel like the people I've known, like in the truth as witnesses, lots of people are just kind of like skating by. Like, very few
Oh
people are
yeah.
actually trying to do the thing. And like, you know, so many people are just born into it. It's their reality. And they're just trying to lead like a life that is like halfway enjoyable. Lots of people are like watching things that they shouldn't be watching and doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And that's because they're normal people. And I feel like, and then you have this segment of the congregation that are really like all out or all in. Um, and I feel like there were just lots of normal families who like, they were very much witnesses, but they were just trying to like live their lives and kind of chill. And like, my dad was not chill spiritually, nor as like a person. And my mom was very like, she had many more friends than my dad did. Like, she was well liked, but she was also quite an intense person. So I think, yeah, I think we were kind of like the weird family, but also like the hyper spiritual family.
Well, and I think that just goes to show, because sometimes that can be an insight into what we went through as kids. When we look at the fact that your dad wasn't really, or your family, because of your parents, weren't really wanted at these gatherings, that is probably an indication particularly because the reason why they weren't wanted is probably an indication of what life was like for you and the pressure that you were under
Hmm.
as that witness kid, because the other people didn't want to be under that pressure for a minute at a
Yeah.
gathering,
Yeah. Good.
right? And yet
Yeah.
you lived under that,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It was.
that intensity.
Yeah. Home wasn't nice. My dad. It's been weird. Like, so we. This is a big part of the story, and I guess like it makes sense to tell it now. When I was 11, almost 12, my mother took us four kids and we left my dad and moved to Germany
Mm.
because inside of the home, he was abusive, mainly just on an emotional level. There was some physical abuse there, but it wasn't constant. He wasn't like throwing us around and beating us and we weren't covered in bruises, but there were instances that were quite awful. But he was not a good husband to her and he wasn't a good father to us. And so we left ultimately. And even though obviously my mother was the adult, so she made that decision, like we were all for it. Like we're like, let's get out of here. Especially when I think up till the age of maybe like 7, 8, 9, it wasn't as apparent that things weren't right at home. Because I was maybe just like blissfully being a kid and like running around outside and going to school. I definitely wouldn't have said that my dad was the most loving person, but I feel like that period of my life, it just felt like he was absent. Like I don't really remember him. I remember going to him and saying like, oh, will you draw with me? Like, can we sit down and play something together? And it just never happened. Or he'd sit and draw with me for 5 minutes and it was over again. So there was definitely a lack of love and attention. But then as I approached kind of the age of 11, it felt quite dark at home. Like he had a very dark presence. And I know there was a lot that wasn't right in their marriage. So basically when I was 11, we left, and relocated to Germany, which started a whole nother chapter and I'm still very grateful to my mother for doing that because she really had hell and high water to pay for that decision. And she was a witness her whole life, but doing that really changed her life. I think it changed it for the better in that she escaped a really toxic situation with him, but it brought on many more issues as well.
Well, yeah. Um, well, first, let me say that, bruises aren't always visible. And
Hmm.
physical bruising is not, you can bruise the soul of a child,
Yeah.
and bruise people mentally and emotionally as well. And sometimes there's broken bones in there. There's things that have been broken because of it. I mean, it doesn't mean they can't heal, but um, the mental and emotional abuse of an authoritarian person. I mean, it's the way I like to cash it is this: Jehovah's Witnesses breed narcissists and attract them,
Hmm.
and there's a
Yeah.
lot of that goes into it, and um, the pain of that lingers far longer than a bruise.
Yeah.
And for your mom to be able to stand up under all the pressure of Jehovah's Witnesses, to remain married and in union, and I don't think you said they divorced, but
They did eventually.
they did eventually. Okay, but at
Yeah.
that time, even just to leave and to go to another country, and not just to leave, but to leave again. And the hierarchy matters.
Yeah.
To leave a guy who was a missionary,
Exactly. Yeah.
Bethelite, and all of this, I think that a lot of people would see her as the bad person in this, right?
Definitely.
Everybody's going to look
Yeah.
down on her and be like, oh, poor him, because she left.
Yeah. She was really vilified by many people, especially in the congregation that we left when we left. she had people straight up, like lifelong friends, calling her up being like, you're an awful wife, you're doing the wrong thing, your husband is a good man, like as if they know, you know. But she was really, she had to listen to a lot. And she, yeah, there were lots of consequences socially, but even later on in the congregation in Germany, like she had been a special pioneer, a missionary, and for the rest of her life, they wouldn't let her be, even do auxiliary pioneering. Like, and she was someone who would do like 40 hours in a month, whether she was pioneering or not. Like, she was very invested, and she had such like an unbreakable faith, sadly. It was very real to her. She, in ways, she was like the real deal when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses, because she just like, God was so real to her. Like, he was her best friend. And she had a very traumatic childhood as well, from what I know. And I just remember her telling me, like, she was 3 or 4 years old, and her parents were they're still around, I think, as far as I know, but they were just awful parents to her, like physically abusive, emotionally neglectful. And I remember her saying, when she was around that age, just praying to Jehovah and saying, you're the only person I have, like, you're my only friend, because she was so alone. Which, you know, it's like, in a way, great that she had that coping mechanism, but for any child to be put in a situation where all they have is Jehovah, you know,
It's
is,
heartbreaking.
yeah, but that obviously set the foundation for her whole life. And yeah, she had this imaginary friend that, as we get further into the story, like, she will see that she chose her children over, obviously. She chose over her children. But yeah, she had
Well,
a pretty intense faith. But yeah,
yeah.
so
Well, you can see that she kind of needed that, right? Like, that's that imaginary friend that she had at that
of
time for
course, yeah.
her was her safety
Yeah.
and was everything for her. She needed to believe in something or someone bigger than her, because she's just a little kid, you know, in a really abusive situation growing up. She's got to believe that she needs somebody to be there for her, because she doesn't think she can handle it.
Yeah.
And this is
Well,
really
she can't,
sad.
like, yeah.
Really sad. She just needed a hug.
Yeah. Yeah. Just good
Um,
parents.
but
But
so
yeah.
good for her. I mean, so but you can see. So sadly, I think we know where I from what you said, she was able to leave some situations that were not good,
Hmm.
but not all,
Yeah.
which is a shame.
Hmm.
But um, it does sound like she was trying to protect herself and you kids
Yeah.
from something and someone who was very unhealthy. What did
Yeah.
he go? So what? So she leaves and goes to Germany. What's he do? Does he just stay
So
in the
it
States?
was weird. The idea initially was that we go and stay with with her sister and her sister's family for a few months, and that my dad sorts out his issues. I think, from what I know, he didn't have a good childhood either, and
Probably not. He was
experienced
raised one of
abuse.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, there's a level of abuse in like most
Yep.
of those upbringings. But the idea, even before we left, like, and growing up, I was definitely privy to a lot of adult issues which I shouldn't have known about, and that's one of the things that I still kind of, I loved my mother, but I struggle with how fast she made me and my siblings grow up by just treating us like her little therapists as well, which
Yeah,
is
that's
definitely
very unhealthy.
unhealthy. And as a kid, I loved it. I think, like, especially my sister and I were quite precocious and very much interested in all the drama, you know, but you as an adult still need to know better and know to protect kids, from all of that. But but yeah, so I knew that I think all she wanted was like couples therapy, or for him to go into therapy, because she knew it was an unhealthy relationship and his behavior was really harmful. And so the idea was we go to Germany, he sorts himself out, gets some help, and then after a few months, we can kind of revisit the situation and then hopefully get back together. Because obviously, all the while, she is a devout Jehovah's Witness. Like, she doesn't want to be divorced. She doesn't want to give up on this holy marriage. So, so yeah, that was the idea initially. And he came over to visit in Germany a handful of times, which we as kids, we just didn't want to see him. We found it quite frustrating that he was there. But he would come over, and it was awful because he would come over, and we've only just, like, we moved over in March of 2004. And his first visit, I believe, was in July of 2004. And he ended up staying with one of the families in the congregation, like one of, I think it was maybe even the overseer's family. He stayed with them, and all the while, like, he is able to manipulate these people in, like, swaying them to his side, gaslighting my mom, stuff like that. And so I think very quickly, this kind of what should have been a new start for us and for my mom was tainted and twisted by my father's presence. And then over the years, he would come, I think he came like once a year, but eventually we let him know that he wasn't welcome. And because he never even attempted to sort out his issues. And so it became clear that we weren't going to be going back anytime soon to the States. And then we also didn't want him there because it was just the same old thing. Like, his behavior was the same. He wasn't trying to change and be a better father or spouse. So eventually we told him not to come, please. And he would just show up from America to Germany. He would be standing outside our house one morning, which to me, like, it's like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like what I imagine seeing, like, your stalker or like someone who has hurt you, threatened you, just standing outside your house one morning from across the ocean. So that happened once, and then it happened again. And the second time it happened, we just like left town for a week. And I remember, and that was the last time I saw him, actually. That was in 2008. We're gonna go to school in the morning, and like we're just leaving the house, and he's standing outside our house, and we just got in the van and drove away. And I think we went to stay with friends for a few days or something, but again, just strange behavior, not normal. And
all the while, through all of this, is he still an elder?
So he lost
I would assume they at least took his privileges away to some degree.
He lost his privileges. There was a really weird thing that happened a few months before we left. We had a kind of like family sit down because we children were just quite sad about how he wouldn't really spend time with us, how he wouldn't like take us to the movies, just get some pizza. Again, it goes back to this like idea of like what normal families do. And we just vented as kids. Like, I was probably spearheading that campaign as well. It's just like, why don't we, because everything was always about money as well. And he always had his like wine with dinner, and like he had his things that he liked. But if we wanted to go out for pizza once a month, we're not doing that. And so I think I was probably quite frustrated as a little like 10, 11-year-old, just like, why can't you just do more with us? Why can't we do fun things? You're never like spending time with us. And bear in mind, he was an elder. He was always very exemplary to what I knew. He got really drunk that night. He went upstairs like with his, you don't get those here in the UK or in Germany, but like the huge like gallon wine jugs,
Oh yeah.
the kind of weird round ones. He took one of those upstairs and he drank the whole thing. And we were sitting downstairs like watching a movie or something. We just heard him like thrashing around. It sounded, and then he came downstairs, he went into the bathroom and he filled himself a bath, and he was like pounding the bathroom wall and like splashing water out of the bath. It was scary. Like it felt quite like monstrous. We were just sitting there hearing it. I think he was like howling and stuff. I mean, he sounded kind of sad in a way, but it was very scary as a kid to like hear. And again, that was another situation where it was like, okay, emergency mode. We like grabbed our pajamas, we got in the car and we drove to friends. And it turned out that he'd gotten really drunk. He saw the elders went to see him, and that's when he lost his privileges. So that was maybe in like December or something. And I think that was a big part of the ultimate decision to leave, because that was like a real like crack in his behavior, even though he hadn't been loving or caring, and like he'd been abusive in ways. Like that was something that happened that was just really like scary. And I think it really accelerated this sense of like, this is a bad place to be. But anyway,
well, sure. Again, the abuse gets normalized because you're just used to being around the unloving person, who isn't giving much to the family. So that kind of, that becomes this background noise almost. You almost don't notice it anymore. But then there's something that happens, like this incident here, and it's like, ooh, this is changing in a way that suddenly makes you confront it.
Yeah.
Now the pain of leaving is less than the pain of staying, because the pain of staying is getting scary.
Yeah. But
so obviously,
that was when
he had his. What's that?
That's when he lost his privileges as an elder. But he became one again, and as far as I know, he's a coordinator in a hall over in America now. So his life is going great. I think he's like a pioneer and a coordinator and stuff. So he got back on the train, and
so he's the Kobe, the coordinator of the body of elders, the chief elder of the elders at a congregation again.
Yeah, great guy.
So exemplary.
Yeah, where my mom's trajectory was, again, she was always gung ho, like her worship never changed, but she was like, she was villainized by many, and she was never allowed to have privileges again because she divorced him, left him and divorced him.
Yeah, and I mean, just think about how all of this, affects. I mean, I'm not going to go into everything I could right now, but it affects your relationship with your mom. I mean, you all are trauma bonding over this whole thing with your dad, and it just creates a lot of unhealthy dynamics. And oftentimes we have, at least what I find in my coaching practice when talking to a lot of people, is that really there was one parent who's more overtly abusive, and it's like, oh yeah, that person, there's something there. But the other person a lot of times was a little more manipulative behind the scenes, a little more covertly abusive. They were ill in their own ways, and then it all kind of comes down to us as kids, and we're trying to figure all this out. It's just very confusing. And I mean, you're doing this across, as a kid, I think you said you were 11, across international waters.
Having to learn German as well. Yeah,
there's just so many different things going on here. It's got to be really confusing for an 11-year-old. Plus, isn't 11 when you wanted to get baptized?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that in a sec. I was just going to say, like, you saying that about my parents that's something I've come to see growing up, especially through my 20s, is like my dad was always the bad guy and my mother was the angel in my mind. And like she was very loving and she did a lot for us and she really tried. But as an adult, I have realized that there was a lot of behavior there and a lot about our relationship, which was, I guess, yeah, in a way abusive as well.
Yeah, and
Like,
abuse doesn't have to be um, intentional.
no.
There are a lot of people who are abusive unintentionally. Hurt people. That's
Hmm.
how it kind of works.
Yeah.
And but that doesn't mean it didn't produce certain pain within us, or that it wasn't maladaptive in some way, or that, like, again, abusers, and one of the reasons that abuse is confusing is because abusers aren't abusive all the time.
Yeah.
Some really super loving people can be very abusive at times, and it's almost feels more abusive internally, because there is that chasm that between the loving person and this person who now is withdrawing love and hurting us in ways,
Hmm.
and that creates that dissonance, that confusion, and it makes it hurt.
Yeah. And I was going to say earlier as well, like, regarding my mother, like, she left her abuser,
Mm-hmm.
but she stayed with her ultimate abuser, which was the
Yeah,
organization.
yeah.
And there's so much about the behaviors and, like, even like procedures of a Jehovah's Witness and how things are dealt with that are inherently abusive. And you normalize that behavior.
Yep.
Because if the elders are doing it, like, it must be right. If Jehovah's treating people like that in the Bible, then that's the example, you know? So yeah, it encourages that kind of behavior. They would never admit to that, but it's very unhealthy.
They are a reflection of the particular God that they have put together and worship. They
Yeah.
are a reflection of that. From the top
Mm-hmm.
down, the
Mm-hmm.
authoritarianism and such, and
Yeah.
there's only one right way to do this, and you will do it this way, or what? I'll kill you,
Mm-hmm.
or I'll shun you. You no longer exist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really
And I
sad.
think for my father, I would I don't think I'll ever have this conversation with him, but I'd be very interested to know, like, who he was as a young person and who he
Mhm.
became due to the institution and what was expected of him. I think he had like skeletons in his closet, and I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he had like issues with like same-sex attraction and stuff like that. Like, I feel like he is a person buried all of himself and just became this like JW robot.
And
So yeah.
therein lies the rub. That when we look at all of these people again, hurt people.
Yeah.
And so, my dad was very overtly abusive and narcissistic
Hmm.
and such. Um, just in the last year, I have reconnected with his side of the family and
Hmm.
hung out with them a few times. And I had always heard stories about my dad's dad, but now I know more about those stories.
Hmm.
And I also know things like my dad as a kid was a um do you know what an electronic football game is? It's kind of like has like a vibrating metal top, and you put these football players on it, and they have these little stands, and they vibrate around and run
Oh yeah.
plays.
Yeah.
I don't know if okay, it's kind
I
of an
think
older
I've seen,
thing, but
yeah.
um uh, that's kind of a game that is kind of meant to be played with other people. Apparently, my dad would just sit in his room alone and just play that all day, every day, not talk to
Wow.
anybody. My dad was a deeply, deeply troubled kid,
Yeah.
deeply depressed, and his
Yeah.
dad was deeply abusive.
Hmm.
And so when you start looking back, and when you can start looking and get some of these stories, and you never know where they may come from at times, um yeah, it kind of rounds out the picture. And so it doesn't
Yeah.
excuse any of your dad's behavior. It's still abusive, it's not
Mhm.
okay, and it still hurts.
Mm,
but sometimes it can help us on the other side to have some understanding for the fact that it wasn't often personal.
yeah,
Most of the ways people treat us is not personal, it's a projection of what is inside of them.
yeah.
And your dad was obviously a very hurt person himself. And unfortunately, that means all he had to project onto other people was that pain.
No, of course, yeah. Yeah. And from what
Awful.
I think I remember my mom saying that like his father was like my dad's name times 10, like all the more so, which just makes sense. And both my parents just came from bad childhoods, you know.
Yep.
And again, obviously, we all know that the organization preys on people who are vulnerable and who lack a sense of purpose or stability or community. And yeah,
They're not going out knocking on doors, bringing in healthy people typically.
no.
They're bringing in people who are hurt already
Hmm.
and then making it all worse with their own brand of pain that they're
I
about to
know it just
inflict
like
on those people.
perpetuates itself, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Machine. And it just brings in hurting people, hurts them more, and creates more hurt people. It's really unfortunate.
It is. Yeah.
So, we're at this place in your life where you've now been taken across the pond, so to speak, and you're living this other life. So where do we go from there? The whole, again, the goal of baptism. I know that was
Mhm.
coming up. What's
Yeah.
where does life go for little Daniel?
So my dad's first visit was for my baptism.
Ah,
So I wasted no time in Germany. I got straight on the questions with the elders. It was funny because I was still learning German at the time as well. And these were like, we lived in a very rural area of Germany. So the elders, they didn't speak English, very minimal English. So even doing the baptism questions, it was kind of like I had my English book and they had their German ones, and I passed the questions with flying colors because I'm such a spiritual little 11-year-old, and yeah, got baptized. I was so annoyed actually, and again, this just shows how like superficial this goal was. But I was so annoyed because I was doing the questions leading up to the convention, and my birthday is in the middle of June, but the convention was in July. So I was 12 and not 11. So like my sister beat me. She was younger than me. Um,
which means she's more spiritual than you, of
yeah,
course, right?
way more spiritual. Well, she
I
sure
think
is
we're seeing
now.
what they define as spirituality, right? Like it's kind of a
Yeah,
weird usage of the
yeah. And you
term.
can't blame a kid for thinking that way. Like
No,
the environment creates
sure.
that idea. So yeah, I was baptized when I was 12, just turned 12. And it's funny because even at that age, I remember thinking like, this is a really big step, and thinking like, well, you can never leave now. Like, this is you locked in. But then also just shrugging it off and being like, why would I ever leave? Like, this is the only place. This is the truth. This is everlasting life. Like, why would I want to leave? Like, I'm going to get baptized. And so I did. Yeah. And I was a kid, like, not much changes. You're baptized. Although obviously you have these awkward things where my mother could only pray with a head covering. And even that, I think that was kind of bending the rules. But as a kid, you don't want to be the only one praying all of a sudden. Like my mother was the parent and I'm still a child. But, you know, yeah,
But a male child.
exactly. Very privileged. I'm so grateful. But yeah, it did change things a bit, and it was weird. And like, I guess little like ministry groups and stuff, you're expected to take the lead. And it's like, again, like the mistreatment of women in that organization is blatant. The idea of having these mature Jehovah's Witness sisters who have been in for like 20, 30, 40 years, and all of a sudden they have a little pubescent boy telling them what to do and praying on their behalf. And it's so messed up. It's like, it's
Completely.
so, It sounds like something from like the Middle Ages or something, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this has come up many times, and I know I've mentioned it myself. Um, so for you, did you feel as awkward as I did doing that? Did you
Yeah,
feel completely fraudulent leading out those
fully.
groups, looking out at these adult women and saying, uh, what am I doing up here? Why don't you all leave? Like, I can't even drive. Why are you?
Yeah.
Why am I the one telling everybody where to go and who to go with? This is crazy.
Yeah. No, fully. And I feel like that kind of was obviously I was becoming like a teenager as well. So it was kind of the tipping point for me going from starting to feel the responsibility of what it meant to be like a baptized brother and kind of shrinking back a bit and actually realizing like maybe this isn't all that. Yeah. I think I started sensing that. And then obviously into my teen years, that only grew that sense of like, what the fuck am I doing? Sorry.
Oh no, don't apologize.
Um,
Um,
yeah,
so I don't know where you want to go from here,
I know.
where you go from baptism, but I was going to ask, the what the fuck am I doing here type of thing, or, what is this? What prompted that for you? Like, I know was it the, here I am, and now I got baptized, and now the expectations just ratcheted up to another level here, where suddenly now they want a lot more of me, and
Yeah.
I'm still just a kid.
Yeah. I think that was kind of the initial response, just being like, oh, I don't, and I started doing like mic service at the meetings and stuff. And that was kind of fun in the beginning. But then the pressure just like increases. And as you become a teenager, there were elders who would take me aside and like encourage me to do more in the ministry and like maybe cut my hair and like stop wearing red trousers or whatever. So I guess obviously coming into like my teenage years, I started finding out more about myself and wanting to express myself more. And I was seen as like a young adult rather than a child. And it was just, and racial stereotypes are not a good thing. But in my experience, the German culture that I experienced was very pressuring. And I think that can be like a characteristic of German culture. But
For
I
sure.
think in a German Jehovah's Witness congregation, that's just increased exponentially. Like the pressure and guilt tripping, and which is obviously all part of like the procedure anyway, but there was a lot of pressure.
You
And
feel more forceful?
yeah, and just in your face, and like lack of like any kind of tact as well. And it's, there's this sense with the elders where it's like you don't really know me, like you don't really bother to get to know me. We're not friends, but then you're sitting down next to me with your face like this close to me, leaning in. I can smell your breath and you're telling me like how I should live my life. Like it was, and I just felt like resistance. I think over those years, like more and more resistance built up. And at the same time, like I was discovering the internet, and I said, I had a YouTube channel as a teenager. I was doing lots of photography and putting it online. Um, I so I started exploring who I was through the internet, and that created this kind of separation between my life as a witness, and then I started a double life online, but I didn't feel too guilty about it because it was all just virtual. And I mean, I wasn't even watching porn. Like I was still like, no, don't touch that. Like, but I was making friends online. I was talking to boys. Oh, because I haven't even brought this up yet, but like one thing about becoming a teenager was this sneaking suspicion, which then became a reality of me being gay, and kind of having to wake up every morning and kind of face that reality and have this sense that I would never be able to be myself because I'm a Jehovah's Witness, because I can never leave, because it would break my mom's heart. I would hurt everyone in my life if I were to come out and leave and be a gay man. So that had a big effect on me, obviously. And I then started using the internet to explore that side of me without immediate consequences, or even without doing anything that like on paper was wrong, you
Well,
know?
yeah, there's several leaps here. I mean, just the fact that you're going from being the kid with no TV to now you've
Hmm.
got the internet
Yeah.
and your own YouTube channel. And I gotta
Hmm.
ask, what was your YouTube channel, or like, what were you doing on your YouTube channel? Were you just,
So I was drawing portraits of people and I was
ooh,
recording them and I was like speeding them up, but then I'd always do a spiel at the start and at the end, because it was definitely, I think like there was definitely a level of vanity in me wanting to present myself as this like trendy artist teen from Germany.
well, sure.
But then I'd draw like big YouTubers at the time, and then I'd message them and say, "Hey, I drew you. Check out my video." And then they'd share it, and then I'd get followers. And I never had a huge channel, but it was like I had something quite good going as like while I did it. But yeah, what you were saying, there was, so once we moved, things, rules at home got a lot more lax. Like my mom was still like very much a parent, and there were things we weren't allowed to do, but she also trusted us a lot. And I think under my father's like rule, there was a lot that even she wasn't allowed to do. There were films that she wanted to watch that he wouldn't let her watch. So once we moved, his influence was gone, and she kind of was able to establish her own rules for us, and they were just a lot more relaxed. And I think again, she trusted us. So I got my own laptop eventually, and that was kind of my life made. Like all I needed was my bedroom and my laptop. And yeah.
Well, yeah, that was your escape. That was your way into the outside world. Well, and honestly, say into the inside world, because
Hmm.
that was
No,
the
of
way for
course.
you
Yeah.
to be able to explore who you were on the inside and not allowed to express. That's
Yeah.
got to be
Yeah.
huge.
Hmm. Yeah. And it it's actually funny because that laptop was given to me by my father, and it was the last visit where I actually saw him and spoke to him in 2007. He had brought this laptop, and he was staying at a hotel, and like he wanted to see me and speak to me. So it was in our village. So I just went over, and I was reluctant to see him. But then he gave me this laptop out of the blue, and like I was always quite like a like tech child as well. I love technology, and we always had really awful computers that needed to be like kind of Frankenstein together and stuff. So all of a sudden I've been given this laptop, and it was life changing for me, and I kind of resented that it was from him, but I couldn't say no to it. Again, like all of a sudden he's got money because he doesn't have a family to look after. So he can like buy us laptops and stuff. I think it was his laptop that he didn't want anymore, but like still it was a good thing to have.
From
But
what you said, I'm sure he bought himself a new one and gave
I'm
you the
sure,
old one.
yeah, yeah. It was quite funny actually, because then over the years, as I started to use it to like talk to boys online and like get
Mhm.
in touch with my queerness, I had moments where I felt like this laptop was Satan, that Satan used my dad to give me this laptop because Satan knew that this laptop was going to open up this whole part of like the internet to me.
That's so sad.
I know.
But you see again how the doctrine and everything works against you in those ways.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I understand why you would have felt that way.
Yeah.
So you're now in your teenage years, you're um finally, it sounds like, starting to be able to explore who you are.
Yeah.
Doing this amongst your mom, your brothers and sister, and the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, were there any seminal moments or big things that happened along the way there in your teenage years? You know, like here in the States, around 16, you usually get your first job, maybe, or something like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
where did your life go?
Well, I started working for my uncle who had like a cheese business. He would go to big markets near us, but in bigger cities, and like sell cheese from a cheese stand. And it was great cheese, like really wide variety. I still really enjoy cheese. But I got a little job working for him every Saturday, which was the first time I ever had money besides my like small allowance I'd get every month. And at the same time, like this was like peak internet kind of life. And I met a guy on a website he was from Scotland, which is ultimately how I ended up in Scotland. So I met this boy. He was from like the Outer Hebrides, which is one of the islands like way up north in Scotland. And he grew up really Catholic, and he was gay, but in the closet. And I was in this tiny town in Germany, and I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I was gay, and I was in the closet. So it started as a friendship, and I finally just had someone to relate to for the first time in my life. But in time, it became quite romantic, but again, all just online. And looking back, it was so innocent. Like we were both 18, and it was our first time being like liking someone else, and not just liking someone else, but kind of being able to express it and feel like you were boyfriends, I guess. And then I knew we spoke for almost a year online, and we were kind of nurturing this relationship. All the while, I'm obviously going to the meetings, doing all my stuff. I think mentally I was quite checked out of the meetings. I would just sit there. I mean, I would still comment all the time, because that's one thing that I always enjoyed, was like participation. It was like, I guess it's like it being at school, like just thinking for yourself and thinking up things to say. I always enjoyed that.
Well, also, I mean, we'll get to it later, but I know your like performance is a thing for you.
Yeah, true.
It's
Yeah.
a chance to perform, like giving a
Yeah,
talk or a part
fully.
at the Kingdom
Yeah.
Hall, or answering at the meetings. It's like a little mini performance that you get to do and get a little attention. And it's just, I don't know, it can be that for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's quite, yeah. It's like a game almost. Like,
Hmm.
but so I'd give my comments, and then I'd just like sit, and I would just draw and write songs in my notebook. And I was basically an adult at this point. So it probably didn't look great. And it's funny, I've kept so many sketchbooks or notebooks, and I have so many passages where I'm writing lyrics to a new song, and then my mom will come over, like reach over, and she'll write a note on my page just asking like, is everything okay? Like, why don't you pay attention a bit more? And then we have this like string of conversation across the next two pages of me just being like, I don't want to be here. Like, I'm so bored, blah, blah, blah. I hate these people, whatever. And then
Oh, wow.
her responses back and forth.
So you
Yeah.
were being kind of forthcoming with your mom about how
Yeah.
you felt about this.
Yeah. I think
Ooh.
that's one thing about our relationship, and it wasn't always healthy, but like she was very honest about how she felt. And there were I guess it was part of the whole like judgmental thing as well, but there were just so many people in the congregation and brothers in the way they taught and spoke that she found very frustrating and kind of like hard to bear. And so there was always a culture in our family of expressing that, which I think in the end probably almost like it encouraged me to just dismiss it, which obviously wouldn't have been her goal. But she was so critical herself. And I think also just very sensitive to the way things were done, that there was definitely a lot of honesty when it came to those things. And she would agree with me, but then it would always be, but oh, Jehovah wants us to be here. And like, you know, where else will we find the spiritual food? And it's better than nothing, you know. But yeah, I could be honest with her on that level, not about my sexuality.
Gotcha. But I mean, even just to be able to be honest, uh, I hate these people. I don't want to be here. To be able to say that freely to her,
Yeah.
that's kind of a rare thing to be able to express to
Yeah.
a Jehovah's Witness parent.
Yeah.
But I can. It sounds like she had honestly her own issues with it as well.
Hmm.
That you all were allowed to be honest with one another about
Yeah.
and open about.
Which I'm grateful for,
Yeah,
like with all that
had
went
to be
wrong.
nice not to feel alone.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And kind of, it's weird because I think I felt like a misfit in the congregation, but I also felt like a misfit outside. And so, and I think my mother felt like that a lot of the time. And again, like it's sad that she could never see where that originated and that it was a symptom of the cult, you know, because she was, yeah, she had a lot of individuality, but she just also kind of ran into kind of walls with it all the time. And she was just shut down in who she wanted to be or how she wanted to express herself. And, but yeah, so we were very like transparent, or I was able to be about how I felt. But yeah.
Um, well, again, uh, we talked earlier about with your dad, there was a point at which the pain of staying became greater than the pain of leaving.
Hmm.
Not that it's always that simple, but um, there was a point where she was able to leave and get away.
Hmm.
But this witness thing, it has hooks in you in so many different angles and in so many different ways. You're not just hooked by one thing. It's a lot of hooks that you have to be able to unhook in order to get free from all the different lures that are out there that you're attached to.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a much more difficult thing, I think, to then break away from.
Hmm. Well, it's always that mantra of like the people are imperfect, but the the teachings are perfect, you know. So if anything ever goes wrong or doesn't feel right or someone hurts you, it's like, well, they're imperfect people, and you're kind of like being gaslighted again into suffering it because, or suffering them because, oh, they're just imperfect, when actually like a lot of the behavior is not right. But there's always this excuse being, but Jehovah is perfect and he can see you and he can feel how you're feeling and he'll get you through this. When in truth, it's all just people. Like it's all just highly imperfect people, which everyone's flawed in this world, but you're dealing with people are, who create a high control group. And so it's all controlling people, and that's never going to feel good. But obviously when you're in it, it's like, oh, throw your burden on Jehovah, like he can see what you're going through, this isn't right. But, and she suffered so much like kind of opposition in the congregation as to like her choices in life regarding my dad, and not being given privileges again, that she felt like there was almost this like martyrdom in her life because she was going to stick to Jehovah through it all, even if the brothers were mistreating her, whatever, you know. And that even came up after I came out, this idea of, oh, but Daniel, Jehovah says, and you know, like, I can't have a husband now because I married like, no, I got divorced on like unbiblical grounds. So she was separate from my dad, but she was never allowed to marry again. So she was like, we're in the same boat. And I'm like, no, we're not. Like, you had your chance and you're not homosexual. But
oh yeah, that's not that's a false equivalency.
yeah,
Yeah,
no,
someone who's gay will never be allowed ever
no,
to have a
no.
relationship inside
Yeah,
the organization, whereas she's had opportunities.
exactly. Yeah. And apparently we're going to get resurrected gay now as well. So that's great.
So that's, oh wait a minute, is that it? You'll be resurrected gay, but
Or
and
you'll
then you'll
come
have
into the new
to,
system gay and then you have to
but
change.
then yeah, you'll have
Yeah.
to work on
Yeah.
it because we've got to make the path as difficult as possible at all times and
Yeah,
let you know how
exactly.
wrong
Yeah.
you have
Because
to
that
know
was
how
always
wrong
the
you are,
that
right?
was always the thought growing up as well, as like, oh,
Yeah.
well, if I just hold on, like this will be taken away and it'll be fine. But now it's like, wait, no, like what? Terms and conditions have changed. But we know
Yeah.
that that happens all the time.
Well,
But yeah, so
sure.
back to like my teenage years. So this boy that I met online, I ultimately went to Scotland. I was working this job. So I was making like, I wasn't making much, but I was making maybe a couple €100 a month. And I was putting them aside. I was saving up. And I knew I wanted to go to Scotland and see this guy. And so eventually I had to tell my mom that I had a friend in Scotland, obviously not a boyfriend in Scotland, but a friend. And I just told her one day in the car, I was like, I have this friend. I was about to say the name. I probably could say the name, but it's fine. Don't have to mention it. And I'm going to go visit Scotland. And she didn't like the sound of it, but she also didn't stop me. I was 18 at this point as well, so she couldn't have kept me from going. Maybe she would have if I was still a minor, but she seemed concerned and she just kind of said like, I don't think you should go, but if you do go, like be careful. And so it was actually funny because we were in an English congregation in Germany, which many Bethelites go to because they're either from like foreign countries or because they're trying to improve their English. And so we had many Bethelites in our congregation, even though it was quite far from the Bethel. And through that kind of situation, we had met a couple from Scotland. And so when I was traveling over, I kind of thought, well, if I break this up and I stay with witnesses for a while, then it'll kind of like balance things out. And my mother might be a bit more trusting of what I'm doing. So I ended up getting in touch with this couple and then in touch with their parents. And so I planned in a week where I went to stay with this Jehovah's Witness family and 3 weeks where I was staying with my friends. And it was, so then when I ultimately went, it was just after my 19th birthday. And it was many a first time for me, like the first time getting drunk, the first time like having any kind of physical intimacy with someone else. First time in a nightclub, like many firsts, and I had a blast. And then after 2 weeks, I go away to this Jehovah's Witness family on the north coast of Scotland, and I'm going in service with them, and I'm going to their meetings. And I actually remember the watchtower on that Sunday was about like sex and sexual immorality, and I was getting so many comments like talking about this, and I got so many like old sisters came up to me after the meeting just being like, wow, you spoke so well on that topic and like so mature, because so many young ones don't even want to speak about this. But and all the while, like I had just had my sexual experience like the week before. Yeah. And then when that was over, I went back to meet my friends and we just partied more. So it was a very like very debauched month, but also like had a little spiritual highlight as well.
How did you feel about all of that? Did you feel like, this is the game you got to play, and I'm playing the game, and or did you have any? Were
Yeah,
you bothered because you were not acting in accordance with your baptism in some way? Did you have shame and guilt around it?
I remember arriving and like meeting these people, especially the boy, but then also his flatmates, who I became friends with. Strangers, essentially. Like, I'd gotten to know him over the course of a year, but only through the internet. And then suddenly I'm sitting in their living room and we're playing like drinking games, and they're like drinking a lot of alcohol. And I've had drinks at this point, but I've never been drunk in my life. And I remember sitting there the first day or two being like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. Like, what am I doing? And I guess probably sitting there kind of judging what they were doing. But then quickly enough, I just joined in and had a lot of fun. It was intense. Like, these are kids who have been drinking since they were like 14, 15. And I've never been drunk in my life. So it took its toll. I spent many nights like over a toilet bowl, I think, afterwards. But I somehow managed to just like let go and enjoy it. I think when I was up north, I did feel conflicted about being around witnesses and going in service, going to the meetings. I think I did feel bad, but then it was just, I guess in a way I'd been acting for like a year and a half already, because I'd already been, I'd had this like other life online. So it actually didn't, I can't remember it. I remember feeling bad at points, but also not feeling not feeling like I was deceiving anyone. It was almost like, oh, I'm just showing you a different side of me.
Well, sure. I mean, don't they kind of teach us how to do that? I mean,
Well, yeah,
you got to go to
exactly.
school, but you can't be yourself.
Yeah,
You've got to be the little witness kid at school. You can't fully do or be who you want to be at school. You have to remember you're representing Jehovah or whatever. Like, you're never allowed. There's always this compartmentalization to some
yeah,
degree of who you are, and trying to put this part over here and show who you are, or you've got to reflect who they want you to be
yeah,
in these various scenarios, so it can be easier for some of us to go like a chameleon,
yeah.
uh, be
It's
who we need to be in a
performative.
given situation.
Yeah, it's a performance. And
Yeah.
looking back, like, I'm describing this behavior. I've probably never really like, I've not told this story in a long time, but I'm thinking about it. I'm like, that's kind of disconcerting, that it's it's dishonest, but it's like a survival mechanism almost,
Oh, 100%.
but
Yeah.
it's like, imagine I'd kept doing that for the next 10 years. Like, you become a very dishonest person, full of like secrets and lies. It's awful.
It is awful, but it flies in the face of this uh appearance or perception of Jehovah's Witnesses, that Jehovah's Witnesses are like the most honest people out there. That's
No,
not true at all. Jehovah's Witnesses lie to themselves and to others all the time
of course,
to
yeah,
fit in, or to wherever they need to fit in.
because they're not allowed to be human. Like,
No, you're
their
not allowed to be
humanity is,
authentic.
yeah. And so, yeah, I'm convinced that every Jehovah's Witness has a level of that in their lives,
Oh yeah.
because the rules are so restrictive. But then when you do things that you want to do, and you express yourself, or you have a good time, the guilt afterwards and the shame is that's what's truly damaging. And after this month long I was away in Scotland, coming back, that's when it really kicked in. I felt terrible for a year.
Mm.
And because I knew, like, now I've done things that would warrant a judicial committee, that would really get me into trouble.
So you had
And
like this secret sin thing that they talk about sometimes,
yeah,
that you were harboring a secret sin, and
yeah,
was it kind of eating you up inside?
it was, yeah. And then I also remember, because as most young people do, like I discovered masturbation when I was 12. So like ironically around the same time that I got baptized. And it's weird because I've looked back at like my teenage years and realized I spent my teen years feeling like I was fighting an addiction. And I
Mhm.
I was constantly like, it would happen again, and then it was like, I need to quit. This needs to stop. And then I'd go a few days, maybe like even make it a week, and then it would happen again. I'd just be like back at square one. And my whole like, from the age of 12 until like that point, I'd already had this thing that I felt was really bad, and that I felt was, that I was ashamed of. And I felt, for some reason, I even convinced myself that not that many people do this. Whereas obviously now as an adult, like virtually everyone, especially like teenagers, doing that in the organization. But I just felt like, why can't I just do it right? And I think that being a part of my life and having that shame about that for so many years, I think it kind of started this departure in me of just feeling like, well, I can't do this right. I'm not good enough. I'm too fleshly. I'm too sinful. I'm too weak. And so then when I actually had done something like actually sexual with another person, it was so much, I felt so much worse about it, but it was almost just heaped on top of that pre-existing guilt regarding something that's very normal as well, but you're made to feel awful about. So I was kind of familiar with the feeling, but it it was like times 100, obviously. Um, and yeah, it's funny. I have this sketchbook from that time in Scotland, and I got back from Scotland, and then I think like 4 days later was our convention. So I have this book where I'm writing songs about this boy. I've drawn portraits of him into it. And then like the next page, it's like all these convention notes. And that's one, again, I loved participating and I loved taking notes because it was something to do. And it was kind of like visual, I guess, like something about it. Um, so just again, like the dissonance between like just having had a month of getting drunk and like kissing this boy, and now I'm sitting here at this convention, I'm taking notes like I'm the most spiritual person in the world. Um, and I've entries in that book as well of saying like, because I really missed him then, and our relationship changed after that happened. It kind of felt like he distanced himself a bit after that had happened, which hurt me a lot. But I remember writing this, it was almost like a resolution. It was like, I really need to like finish up my schooling, move to Scotland so I can be closer to this boy, and work on my relationship to Jehovah. And I wrote that all in one paragraph. And it's like, what was I thinking? Like, I think I'd kind of like entered this headspace where I felt like I wanted to believe that Jehovah wouldn't be mad at me for just being who I was, and that it was maybe more like on the organization. I think I really tried to piece together this picture of God where I could still feel connected to him, but also not like hate myself. Um,
Well,
it's,
sure. Again, we
uh,
were taught how to rationalize things. We were taught, you listen to that song, you shouldn't listen to it technically, but you like the song.
mhm.
And then so you just rationalize somehow, well, it's not like I'm doing anything. Let's say the song had some sexuality in it or something. Well, it's not like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
acting it out or anything. I just like the
yeah.
song. And
Mhm.
and so we were kind of taught to rationalize things to make them fit. And you see a lot of people, I mean, I know I've interviewed a lot of um, people who happen to be gay, and many of them have talked about, whether it was thinking that somehow being okay, gay would be okay in the new system,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
maybe if I perform enough in the congregation, if I go join the regional building committee and I go build kingdom halls and I do this stuff, somehow that will kind of make up for the fact that I'm gay, and
Yeah.
maybe it'll be okay. So I just think that, yeah, you've had to rationalize who you are for a long time. So what's one more?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And it's funny what you say about music as well, because my whole, like, as I said in the beginning, like I was so enamored with like the idea of the pop star and like pop music, and I was so drawn to it. I would even like make up my own pop stars and make up songs for them, and I was their manager in my head and stuff. So I was always very engaged with music and pop culture. And again, even there, I would always sift through the lyrics and the songs, and I would feel like, okay, I know what that means. I probably shouldn't be listening to this. I probably even like overread into lyrics, and like found things that were wrong with them when it wasn't even like what was meant. But again, it's just another layer of having to, you have to like navigate and negotiate your relationship to everything
Mm-hmm.
in the outside world. And you're constantly trying to like censor and limit and filter what you can let in and what not. But as a person, you're going to make exceptions, and as a kid you're making exceptions. Like I knew I shouldn't be listening to lots of like Madonna and Britney songs and like Eminem and 50 Cent and all that, but
But Daniel, if you buy the Eminem album and it's the edited version,
exactly,
then it's okay. That's what I did.
well, I think in our family there was a sense that if the lyrics are bad, like you just don't listen to it, regardless of the censorship or the parental advisory thing. But yeah, you're, and again, it's just creating more like cognitive dissonance between like
Yeah.
what you are drawn to and what you like and what informs your sense of identity, and then what you're actually being told. And I think it's funny actually, because when all of this happened in Scotland with that guy and online, like Lady Gaga's album Born This Way had come out. And it's actually funny because I have never liked that song. Like I like the message. I don't like it like melodically, but the rest of that album, I just ate up, or a lot of it. And it's like, what I loved about what she was doing at that point were these like dark undertones. Like she was really not afraid to explore the darker, more theatrical side of, I guess, just music and lyricism. So there were always these singers and musicians that really informed my inner world and my creative world. And along with me kind of like living on the internet as a teenager, at least outside of school and the meetings, my creative world was becoming this thing that I could escape to. And it was very much informed by art and pop culture. And I remember playing songs in the car, ones that I thought would like pass the test with my mom. But I remember, I think there was a track by La Rue, I don't know if you're familiar, called In For the Kill. And it's like this like Brit pop song from 2009. I remember playing it to my mom, not thinking much of it, and she was like, "You need to be really careful about these lyrics because they're gonna plant seeds of like rebellion in in you." And she was probably right, but but I couldn't help it, and yeah. Anyway, that was a tangent, but
Oh no, but I mean, all of those musical things are a part of who we are, or who we were, or who we were trying to figure out. Like we were trying to
yeah,
figure out who we were. We didn't know, so we were trying on different hats and seeing which ones fit. Right? I
of
mean,
course, yeah,
and we were exploring in different ways. So you had done some exploration, so to speak. Now you're feeling super guilty and shame
hmm.
about this thing, like you're somehow a bad person for having explored that. You said you felt it for a year afterwards. Was there something that transpired in that year that made you change?
So I feel like after I went to Scotland, I had, I think before I went, I was at a bit of like a fork in the road between really getting on top of like my sinful inclinations and like my gayness and just being a good witness, or actually like physically realizing like all these things that I wanted. And after that had happened, it kind of felt like maybe even just subconsciously like the point of no return. I had a taste of what I wanted and even just where I wanted to be. Like being in Glasgow for that summer, I just had such a sense of freedom. And I think also that boy at that point became representative of that freedom because I thought I wanted and had to be with him by all means. When he was a great guy, but we were both really young and like we're actually still friends now. And I stayed with him in London about a month ago because I was doing some work there, and we're great friends now. But I look at him now and I'm like, we were never meant for each other. Like we're great as friends, but we were so young. So he represented this freedom that I had had a taste of. And so as much as I was back and I was back going to meetings, I was at the convention and whatnot, I knew I had to get away. And it wasn't even so much a matter of like, I want to leave this religion. It was a matter of like, I need to leave home. I want to be with this guy. I want independence and freedom. So I started, it almost felt unbearable being back home for that period of time. Like I really hated being there. And that's where some of these conversations come from as well in my notebooks at the meetings, just being like, I don't want to be here. Like, this is unbearable. And again, I was being honest with my mother, but I couldn't actually express why, or where those feelings came from. So I started looking into art courses in Scotland to study art, which again is like higher education, big no. Studying like something in the creative industries is also like, where, how are you going to make money with that? It's full of gays and debauched people and ravers and like, obviously like a lot of that industry is also vilified because people are like individuals and quite left wing oftentimes. So, but I said to my mom, like, I think I want to go study in Scotland. And at first, so I applied for a design course because I felt like doing design was more palatable than going straight into like fine art. And it would be maybe more, it would provide more of a basis to actually make money in the future.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And I still had, so I would have graduated from high school in Germany in the summer of 2013. That would have been like my full education, because the way German school goes, like you can graduate after ninth grade, you can graduate after 10th grade, you can graduate after 12th or 13th. And I was aiming for 13th, but you can lead after 12th and it's still quite like a high qualification. And so I just said, like, I'm going to apply to this art school in Glasgow. And if I get in, I'll just graduate then and I'll leave. And so I did. I applied and I think my portfolio was good, but I think I also just got quite lucky because it's a very prestigious school and they get lots and lots of applicants for these courses. And I only applied for the one course. I said, I'm going to apply for this. If I get in, I'm going. And if not, I'll just stay another year and be miserable, I guess. But I got in. And so I started like planning my move. And there were so many brothers I told who just like looked so disapprovingly at me. They were like, you're moving to Scotland and you're going to do like a higher education course. It was very disapproving. I was just like, yeah, like I tried to sugarcoat it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing design because then maybe I can like do design at Bethel or something. When I think again, like deep down, I knew like I'm not gonna be a witness for long. So I'm planning to move. my mother, so we were basically on benefits. My mother was quite unwell. She always struggled with like her health, and so she wasn't able to work. And because my sister had moved out at this point, we three boys were still in high school, so she was getting money from the government, and along with that we got money for our housing. But because I was moving out, her budget was going down. And so the apartment we had been in for 3 years, we had to move out because I was leaving and find somewhere new. And I felt really bad about that. I felt like my selfish decisions were like uprooting my family and making their life really hard. And I remember I was in the kitchen and I was like taking dishes out of the shelves and wrapping them in newspaper and putting them into a box. And I was listening to this like piano piece and I was just like crying. I don't think anybody else was in the room, but I was very emotional because I felt like that moment like signified and symbolized this really big change in my life where I was I was doing something for me, but I felt so guilty about. And I guess on some level, I also knew that it would ultimately like pull me away from my mother as well. But it was quite like a poignant moment of, yeah, I don't know, just feeling like, again, like point of no return, like this is happening. I'm going in this direction.
Well, sure, and that always culminates in whatever negative happens or whatever negative feelings someone else has is directly your fault.
Yeah,
Always, right?
yeah.
It's always your fault that they are in whatever situation they're in or that they have whatever feelings that they have. You are responsible, Daniel,
Hmm.
for the future and the thoughts and feelings of your mom, your siblings, whoever it is.
Yeah, good
This isn't the
point. Yeah.
case.
And I do feel like my mom had narcissistic traits and like a lot of her relationship to us children. And I think especially me, because in ways I was the closest to my mother, because I think we were similar and I was very sensitive to what she was going through. I think she projected a lot of what she felt onto me from a very young age onward. Um, and yeah, it's interesting you say that because it's valid. It probably was very much what I was feeling. When, a 19-year-old should be able to say, hey, I'm leaving the house. I'm going to go study. Bye, without feeling
Well, and your
like you're
parents should
holding
be
people's
proud of you for that.
existences, yeah, in your hands. But again, it's like financially, there was, even after we left my dad, like, if anything, the situation got more difficult. So I felt like I just felt bad for leaving and changing all of that. And yeah. Then before I moved to Scotland, over the last few months of me being there, this is so weird to even like tell, but I met a sister and we got on really well and we started dating. Again, more like major cognitive dissonance of like compartmentalizing these two parts of my life. I already knew that I was leaving, but I felt like it almost kind of felt like the rebound from this guy in Scotland because we didn't our relationship just faded and we would speak like every few weeks after that, but it just wasn't the same. um and so it kind of felt like, well, here's someone who's like interested in me. So it was kind of like a rebound from that in a way, but then it also felt like I wanted to prove to myself that I could be with a woman, because on some level I was still trying to figure out. I knew I was attracted to men, but there was still this like, oh, maybe I could be bi. Like maybe this would be the answer. And so we dated for a few, and I was 19, she was 17. So we were both very young. And we got on well, like we made good friends, but it felt very uncomfortable. And as soon as I got involved, I felt like I just wanted to back out. And she was getting obviously emotionally invested. And I felt I felt awful about that. And then I moved, and we hadn't broken up when I moved. We tried to like sustain it for a while. Again, like big double life vibes, because I got to Glasgow and I was going out to gay clubs like as soon as I got there. But I think I went back to Germany that summer. So I moved, but then I went back home for a week or so. And while I was there, we broke up. We mutually broke up, which I was so relieved about. Like, she kind of said, I feel like we're more just friends, and I agreed, and it was actually quite easy, but I felt awful leading up to that, having to end it with her. But yeah, so that was my first taste of trying to have a relationship with a woman in amidst, again, like the confusion was just crazy. Like,
the confusion is caused by the pressure. Pressure's come up a few times here. I think you were feeling a lot of pressure, and it came out in these ways where you were trying to be someone that you're not, to try to make things work so that you didn't hurt people, just like most ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, because it's all your fault. You're responsible for the feelings of everybody else. Even though you're not the one who created any of these made up expectations.
Exactly. Thanks for saying that.
No, man, that's everybody. I mean, I see it in my coaching practice all the time. That everybody, is holding themselves to these made up expectations, trying to people please other people, not ourselves usually, and trying to somehow make this awful thing that we were born with work. Because it's all we've ever known. We have no identity to go back to. It's not like there was a before JW time, and we're just trying to make this identity that was given to us work, because the alternative is pretty horrifying.
It's like you lose everything. But it's a good way to recontextualize these memories. And I guess you saying that, because I do very much think that way now, and I don't approach my life now anymore with like Jehovah's Witness guilt, thankfully. But a lot of these memories and stories I've not like revisited or even told anyone, maybe ever. So it's like, it's interesting to utter it and kind of reflect on how you felt, and then, have someone like yourself there who can, see it more objectively and be like, well, actually that is because of this, and it's not because you're a shit person.
Allow me to break in here for a second. This channel is made possible by you, the listener. If you appreciate what we're doing here, please consider supporting at patreon.com/shunned, or leave a review on iTunes or other platforms. Like and subscribe. All those things help the channel. If you're looking for merch, you can go get some Shunned swag from the shunnedpodcast.com website, or reach out there to be on the show. If you're looking for more ex-Jehovah's Witness content, I'll recommend my first podcast called This JW Life. You can find that on podcast apps as well as YouTube. And if you're feeling stuck in life, struggling to find happiness and community, maybe you're haunted by the past, beating yourself up, unsure of who you are or what you even want out of life now that you've lost this one identity that was given to you by a cult, reach out through my other sites like exjwhelp.com, that's exjwhelp.com, or storyworkscoaching.com. And let's see about working together to help you find a life that fits you and who you are, maybe for the first time ever. And now, back to our guest. No, none of it's because you're a shit person. That's why they use shame. So shame is... Guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I did a bad thing, so I'm a bad person. And they try to make you, they moralize everything. They make you feel like somehow you're horrible for not doing the thing that you were never really asked if you wanted to do. It was expected of you, and you didn't follow this one prescribed path, so therefore you're a shit person. And you're responsible for all the pain that you've caused all these other people who themselves decided that you had to be this person. They never asked who you were.
And that's where the narcissism comes in as well. Like, it's all projection of what
it is.
They think life should be led this way, so you have to too. It's the line about guilt and shame, that's that's one you said it a few times, and like it's really stuck in my head. It's a good one. I enjoy that. And there's another kind of line that you've said a few times, which I really appreciate, is acceptance is letting go of the hope that things could have been different, or something along those lines.
Yep, you nailed it.
Yeah, but it's great. Again, like, this podcast has been really good. Just the things I've heard, and the way, obviously, people's stories and having something to relate to, but also your approach to not just navigating the interviews, but also, bringing your own knowledge, like wisdom to it. And yeah.
Well, thank you. It's what I do in my coaching practice as well. And it is, it is important to go back and to look at these things. It's very cathartic, but it's important to go back and to understand, to recontextualize, to reframe, to understand where a lot of these things came from in our lives, because sometimes that's the nexus of patterns that we may even be replaying today in our life in certain ways, and not realize, because we still see them through the old lens because we've never gone back and looked at them. And sometimes we have to have someone else from the outside try to objectively question those things or reframe them with us, because we just have these old tapes playing in our head, and we need somebody to maybe insert some other things to help, or at least help you break out the tapes, listen to them together, and question whether or not the story, that the narrative that went with all of that, is that really true? Because we were fed a story that's not true at all.
Yeah. It's a nice illustration. You must have been great at illustrations in your talks.
I did actually really like illustrations a lot. That was the one part that I liked about giving talks, was trying to come up with a way to contextualize things in different ways.
You would have loved Jesus. It's such a shame you're an atheist. No, but yeah, it's true. It's like, I guess that's what like counseling and therapy is so important about, is kind of retracing things that, that affect you without you realizing it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're all walking around with things that impact us today. We have no idea that they still impact us. I get people at times who come to me and they're like, well, I've been out for 20 years. Why isn't this better? Because time alone doesn't heal. If you're repeating the same bad patterns of the past, you'll just keep doing what you're doing and getting what you're getting. It's not until you start to understand that the way we were given to just be in this world was very maladaptive, dysfunctional, and harmful to ourselves and others, that we can start to actually make those changes.
Yeah. And it's such like an epiphany, even like seeing that.
Like, oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, I've been there. I went through it myself.
That in itself
I get
takes
this.
time. Even just because you've left, I guess it's part of like the waking up, isn't it? It's like, just because you've been disfellowshipped or disassociated doesn't mean that you've started to see it for what it is. That takes time.
Right. Well, you could take the ex-JW out of Jehovah's Witnesses, but that doesn't mean you've taken the Jehovah's Witnesses out of the ex-JW. I mean, there's still all those remnants, the ways that we were taught to think, because it's not just a religion, it's how we were taught to think and feel and behave and move about the world, how we were taught to see others and how we were taught to see ourselves. So it goes so much deeper than, well, I stopped going to the meetings and so I'm okay now. I mean, hey, if that's the case for you, wonderful. I applaud you, and I hope you have a wonderful life. And there's outliers to everything. And so maybe for some that is true. But I mean, look at the ex-Jehovah's Witness community, and it's kind of a hot mess in a lot of ways. And that's because we're all trauma victims. We've been through so much, and we come out, and until we get help, a lot of us are going to keep repeating similar patterns, and there's going to be a lot of the same middle school infighting and stuff that we saw in the kingdom halls, we see in the community outside. And we
that's
just,
a good point.
We all need help in our own ways, and that's great. We should avail ourselves of that, so that we can move on and become ex-Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
hopefully someday.
Yeah, just people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be a reckoning with all this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
definitely.
You can't just walk away from all. I mean,
No.
okay, again, maybe there are some who can, but I strongly believe that it's very hard to just walk away from this thing as though just peace out on it. It didn't affect me.
No,
To me, that's a
I
lot of
would,
the same
yeah,
denial that we felt when we were in. It's just more denial.
yeah. I would argue that you truly can't, like, psychologically, that,
Yeah, I don't believe
like,
that you can, but
it's almost like,
I can't speak to somebody else's
yeah,
experience.
yeah, but yeah. Well,
Yeah. Well, that's why you doing this right now is important.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
cathartic for you,
And
but
it's
it's
taken a while as
also
well. Like, yeah,
can help others.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
No,
because many
it's good.
people have stood in your shoes in different ways.
Of course, yeah, yeah. And so many stories have helped me, like,
Yeah.
again, like the whole, I've listened to basically every episode. So, yeah. And they're all so different, but there's so much like commonality and common ground.
Yeah, everybody that I work with in my coaching practice comes to me, and eventually they're going to tell me something. They're going to be so ashamed of it, and they're going to feel like, oh, I'm the only one. And it's like, yeah, you and everybody else feel this way.
Yeah.
Because we all came from the same place. We were all raised in a similar, predictable environment that produces similar, predictable results and outcomes. So,
yeah. You're not that special.
no, none of us are really that special. No.
Yeah. Anyway, so I moved to Scotland. Should I return to the story?
Yeah, go for it.
I moved to Scotland. When I'm moving, the secretary in my hall in Germany comes up to me and asks me for my new hall so he can send along my publisher card. I was like, fuck's sake. Like, again, if you'd asked me, like, in all honesty, if I thought I was leaving the truth, I probably still I was in enough denial to still think in my head I was going to make it work and I would somehow not end up out. But deep down inside, like, I knew, hence when he's asking to like transfer my card, I was just like, can't you just leave me alone? Like, just let me live. But so I knew where the new hall was. So it gets sent there. I arrive in Glasgow, and the first like 2 or 3 weeks I'm going regularly, but it dwindles very fast. It was actually funny because I made friends with one couple in that hall that actually like I got on with, and within a few months they were disfellowshipped. So it was like, okay, never mind. I was like, another sign that I don't belong here because the only people that I liked are out now as well. So yeah, my attendance dwindles fast, and I moved there in July and my course didn't start till September. So I just had a couple months in Glasgow to kind of just like have fun, go out, find a home, stuff like that. But then once art school began, that was the real departure. It was like, I maybe over the course of like September, October, I went to 2 or 3 meetings, and by November, like, I probably went to my last one. I remember all the while I'm starting to like party with my friends, I'm getting drunk, I'm going to clubs, I'm meeting guys. And I remember, I think it was like what would have been my last meeting. I'd spent the night at a guy's house, and I'd set my phone alarm to get up and go to the meeting. And I was getting up, I was leaving his place, and I just didn't go. And like, I never went back to that Kingdom Hall and didn't show face again. My elder guy who was assigned to me was trying to get in touch. I blocked his number, and it was just this, yeah, kind of soft fade, I guess, because it had been happening over the months. And then again, as much as I had been transferred there as a publisher, what was I going to say? Nobody knew me, like, well, and they didn't it was a congregation in an area where many students lived as well. So they were used to JW students moving in and then like disappearing or moving on or going somewhere else. So I was just another face that kind of faded. And besides that one elder who tried to get in touch, I don't think there might have been one other brother who tried to reach me, but I just cut it off. And I remember at the same time, my mom asked me one evening, like, "Oh, how was the meeting?" And I told her I hadn't gone, and she was very concerned. She was like, "What do you mean you haven't gone?" Blah blah blah. Like, and then I just started. I didn't know that I was about to come out to her that evening, but it is what ended up happening because she was just asking, like, "Oh, that's really worrying me that you're not going to the meetings there. What's going on?" And I just kind of, without telling her, I was like, I just don't belong there. And I feel so uncomfortable. And I have so many misgivings about the religion. And I ended up telling her I was gay that night and that I needed a break from meetings, that I needed to like clear my head. Again, more dishonesty because I was already actively like leading a worldly life. But to my mother, I didn't know how to tell her that I was leaving, you know.
Yeah, the circumstances preclude honesty
Yeah,
to some
yeah,
degree. But I mean, you were honest in coming out to her. How did she receive
yeah.
that?
Well, because she had asked me once as a teenager if I'm attracted to boys, but what are you going to answer when your mom asks you that? Obviously, you're going to say no, especially if you've been trying to hide it or like you're in denial yourself. So then, yeah, she was empathetic towards me, but she also had lots of questions, and um she also said like, "Oh, but why didn't you tell me when I asked you? I gave you an opportunity, blah blah blah." And I was just like, I wasn't ready, and like what am I supposed to do with that, you know? And then I remember, it's funny because I made an art piece with this later, but I remember she messaged me. This was all on Facebook Messenger as well. We weren't even on the phone. But she messaged me saying something like, "But in the Bible, it's Adam and Eve, right? It's like a man and a woman, right?" Which again, she was such like an intelligent, like emotionally intelligent person. But then in instances like this, where it really came down to it, she was just like so brainwashed because like to even believe that Adam and Eve is a true story, like just shows how indoctrinated you are. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Sure. I mean, that's the indoctrination of that. We can go to, you talked about her emotional intelligence. I would say that not understanding that you asked a young kid in the
yeah,
context of Jehovah's Witnesses if they were attracted to boys or not,
yeah,
and you can't understand why he might have said no.
yeah,
I mean, come on
yeah,
now.
yeah, true.
Like, I think there's just a lot of blind spots caused by everything that comes along with being one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah. And I guess in her mind, we were so close on so many things and we were so honest, you know, again,
Because
probably in
she
an
thought you were
unhealthy
just like
way.
her, right?
Probably, again, yeah, like narcissism, but
I was gonna say I understand this. My mom was very codependent. She would always try to tell me, she's like, I feel, like, I know you think the same way too, Mike. And I'm like,
no, I
no,
don't.
I don't. I've told you 10 times that I don't feel that way. And yet you keep putting those exact words in my mouth. I have never said that I agree with you.
But that's also the Watchtower speak as well.
Well,
Like in the
sure,
actual
right? Yeah.
articles, it's like, we agree, or do you not agree? You know,
Yeah.
there are all these like isms that are
Assumption of
actually
agreements.
manipulative. So we had the conversation and I told her that I needed a break, which would turn out to be a very long break, but we were still in touch and she would check in with me. And I think I went home around Christmas, so I saw her there. And I actually got really bad tonsillitis whilst in Germany, so I didn't go to any meetings anyway, but I was quite relieved not to have to go. And then she came over to visit me in Scotland a few months later. And we had a lovely time. Like, as people, we got on well, but it was just, there was this kind of elephant in the room. And I think she was, at that point, she was quite, she didn't want to pry, and she was sensitive to the fact that, like, what I was going through. But I remember she really wanted to go to the meeting while she was over. I think she was there for 5 days or something. And I just, like, I didn't, I told her I wouldn't be going and that she could go. But, and then she came up again. She's like, oh, it'd be lovely to go to a meeting. And I think I did, I tried to discourage her from going as well. And I just said, like, I don't want to go. And she never went, which is a bit, it's weird. Even though I'm like, oh, that's a bit sad. She could have met some nice brothers and sisters.
Honestly, I'm sad that your mom would rather go spend time with those people than spend all 5 days with her son,
That's
who
a
she
good
finally
point
gets
as
to
well.
see.
Yeah. So yeah, that's right. But she left, and then that summer I got like my first official boyfriend at art school, and I told her, and at that point it became apparent that even though I wasn't disfellowshipped, I was in the world. And I actually did go over that summer one last time to visit them. And I told her I had a boyfriend, and I remember sitting in the car, and it was just really silent and awkward. And it felt like the first time I saw this side of her that could be, it was very like harsh and cold. And because I was like, we don't have anything to talk about. Don't you want to know about my life? Don't you want to know about my boyfriend? And she was, it was almost like this acid tone. She was just like, no, I don't. And that was just it, you know? And again, it kind of demonstrates that I had this wishful thinking that somehow I could manage to be accepted, and that like she would make an exception for me, or that she would soften to the idea that I was living differently. Again, I wasn't asking anyone to stop being a Jehovah's Witness themselves. I just wanted to be able to be me, which again is the crux of the whole issue with our families. You know, like, we're not telling them to change, they're telling us to change. And if we would fully accept, I mean, not that we would have a great time like having to listen to their BS, but like, if our family allowed us to be in their lives and they kept doing what they're doing and we did what we're doing, like, that would be the basis of a healthy, like, adult relationship. But there's no acceptance of other people's choices or identities, or
No, what you're asking for, and why that hope springs eternal and it's so hard to not hope for, is you're just asking for love. We all just want our parents to love us for who we are. And we want our parents to see, hey, look, this is me. I'm not you, but I'm me. And I want you to love me for that. And validate that, even if you disagree, validate that this is who I am, and be happy for me that I found my path. But instead, that's why, you know, I always say, I just don't think that they really love us, because I don't think they're capable of love. I don't think they know what love is. They know what care and control is. They love us in their way, but it's not really love, because it's so narrowly defined. And you can see it change. You mentioned it. Like, suddenly this person who's been so loving our whole life can just flip a switch and just cut you like you never exist. Like, it is such a weird thing.
Yeah.
And I know I was able to do it very easily as one of Jehovah's Witnesses myself. But, you know, I think I saw it with my mom a little bit too. You know,
well, I think I heard you say recently on one of the other episodes is conditional love is not love, it's control. Right? Because unconditional
at its core,
love,
it's not really love. I'm not saying that means it's hate, but
no, but
not really love.
Yeah, the unconditional element is inherent to love, you know, especially of your children. but that's, that's what's so disturbing. I mean, there are people with like serial killer children in prison, and they're still like going to visit them because they still have that, they don't think what they're doing is right or what they've done. Like it's their child, I mean, that's a bit of a drastic comparison,
no, it
but
is.
like, I've not killed anyone. I'm not like a felon. I'm not, I might be living a much better life than like ethically better life than a lot of the people
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And, wouldn't, I don't know. I think my mom would rather I killed somebody than that I didn't believe that stuff anymore
Yeah.
and spoke out against the abuses of the organization.
Apostate.
I think she would rather that I was a murderer that killed someone because I could be forgiven for that, but I can't really be forgiven for being who I am today.
Well, we're sinning against the Holy Spirit. That's the thing, and that's unforgivable.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oopsie.
I'm going to throw this out there. This is a little self-indulgence here. So those who say that I talk too much can get pissed off about it. But
well, I've been talking a lot, so it's fine.
But so over the holiday, Christmas Eve, that Thursday night, we had the bomb cyclone hit here.
Oh,
and, we got some snow, and it was a pretty rough night, very cold temperatures. Friday morning, I wake up to a Facebook message from one of those Facebook friends that I have a lot who are ex-JWs witnesses, and that's awesome, but I don't really know them.
Yeah.
And this person was just like, hey, don't you live in the Louisville, Kentucky area? And I said, yes. She said, well, I know this is like really, really weird and out of the blue, but I'm an apostate. My daughter's an active witness. She had these two young people come up from south of Louisville to northern Indiana to visit. And on their way home, they kind of got wiped out by a semi truck, along with like 4 other cars, run off the road, totaled their car. The state troopers took these 2 kids to a hotel about 10 miles north of me and dropped them off so that they had shelter because they had nowhere to go, and home was a long way. So she was like, can you help get them home? And so I was like, well, look, I'm a human being. There's 2 kids. I don't care that they're Jehovah's Witnesses. They're probably hurt. Hopefully they're not hurt, but I know they were at least shaken up and scared and now in this weird place. How do they get home? And so, well, I just put $900 worth of tires on my car the day before. So that was good timing. Jehovah blessed me with $900 worth of tires so that I could go pick up favor. So that I could go pick up these 2 witness kids. So I asked her,
crash your car as well.
Yeah. So I asked her, like, so what do I say if they ask how you know me? She said, oh, I already told them who you are, what you do, and that you're an apostate. So, all right. So here goes mentally diseased apostate Mike, gonna drive like 10 miles north.
They should have just frozen to death outside. That would have been better for them than driving with you in a car.
Than to get in my car.
I know, they're breathing the same air as a...
But Jehovah's Witnesses will take anything from you, right?
Exactly.
They wouldn't give it to me, but they take it from me. Now, and I'm not indicting these 2 kids. They're just kids, right? I don't...
Yeah.
But so I went up and I picked up these 2 kids and I drove them like 30 miles south. I drive, asking them things like, are you okay? Have you eaten? Do you need food?
How far did you drive? Sorry.
I don't know. Like I drove like 7-10 miles north to get them. And I drove like 30 miles to drop them off and then probably 30 miles back or something like that.
That's an effort.
Oh yeah, it was an effort. It was an effort. And I was driving on snow and ice myself to go do this. I mean, I wasn't going to go on a kamikaze mission here. I was smart about what I did. I was, it was a reasonable risk I felt. And so I went and I picked them up and we just talked about cars and like work and just normal stuff of life, right? I didn't spend my time trying to like preach to them against Jehovah or anything. I was just being a good person. So I took them home, dropped them off. And I think the only thing that I said that was anti-witness was like, they happen to live near where I grew up in Louisville. And
Uh-huh.
so I'm very familiar with a lot of the brothers at their hall. And so I was asking about those people and talking.
Uh-huh.
And then I said, do you know any Shemwells? Because I
Uh-huh.
know that I have a brother that's somewhere in the Louisville area. I don't know where.
Okay.
And they said no. And I said, well, if you ever run into any Shemwells, remember that last name. That's going to be either my mom, my brother, or my sister. And say hi to them for me because they're not allowed to talk to me anymore. But tell them Mike says hi. And that's
Nothing
as
but
far
the
as I
truth.
went with anything.
Yeah.
And then, I took these kids home and dropped them off, drove back, probably never hear from them again.
Yeah.
But it's just called like being a person, right? But like,
Yeah.
do you think one of those Jehovah's Witnesses in the Louisville area who knows who I am, do you think that they wouldn't have picked me up if I was on the side of the road freezing to death?
Never.
And so
But
I didn't do it for any other reason than just like if anybody contacted me and said, I got two kids, I don't know, they're probably like
of
20 and
course.
18, and they're
Yeah.
stuck and they need to get home. Can you help? I would say, well, yeah, let me, if I can reasonably do
Yeah.
so, let me see if I
It's
can
like the
help.
right thing to do,
Yeah,
isn't
it's just
it?
the right thing to do. It's a matter of
Yeah.
personal integrity. It's not a matter, I don't care if whether they're witnesses or not. But
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say that didn't add an extra little something to it. Just the fun of being like this apostate going up to pick up these witness kids and take them home because
Yeah.
nobody in their congregation was doing anything to help them. And their
No.
parents, unfortunately, back to being poor witnesses, didn't have a car that could make it.
Yeah.
So,
But then, I mean, to like kind of appropriate the whole lingo, like maybe you planted a seed, just being a nice
sure.
person, you gave a good witness for all like the apostates out there, just like being nice and kind and helping someone out. And even just not, not trying to like bombard them with like your
No,
own ideology, which you would never do. But yeah.
I don't
But
need to
then
change
also,
anybody else's mind. It's not mine to
no, it's
change.
not. Yeah,
Shouldn't
you can't
be.
do it anyway. But maybe they'll
No.
remember, like, oh, remember that nice guy who helped us out. Let's leave the truth.
I mean, look, they got our number, and so if they ever need any help, I told them, if you ever need anything, feel free to call.
When everyone else is
I don't
letting
know
you
these
down.
people. They know, and they can reach out. That's fine, and I would help if I could, if it was reasonable.
Yes.
But again, it's just the way they view us, the way your mom would view you. It's just really sad because you're not some horrible person out here hurting people.
No.
You're Daniel and you didn't do anything to anybody, and yet they're the ones doing something to you. My mom, my brother, and my sister, they shun me. I never shunned them. I live in the same place. I got the same phone number and email address. Call me. Hey, if you're listening, Mom, call anytime. Whatever, we can talk. But I didn't do what you want.
And I think that's the thing. I think there is like sadness in a lot of people when you're disfellowshipped or when you leave because they think you're lost. Yes. But there is also a disdain and like
there's a disdain,
strong judgment, even of your own like children and family and loved ones. Like, I think the way she said that, she probably found the idea of me having a boyfriend absolutely disgusting,
Jehovah's Witnesses are very homophobic.
She couldn't fully, yeah.
And it's just really sad because again, nobody you don't want your own mom to find you disgusting or none of us wants that, but they have to do that to justify the disgusting thing that they're doing. They have to see you somehow as disgusting and just awful so that they can justify doing one of the most disgusting and awful things you can do to another person, and that is shunning them and acting like your own child no longer exists. That's a hard thing to do. They've got to justify it somehow.
Yeah. And it's not, you have to accept, like I had to accept that with her because again, you can't take that on as like your fault because it's not, I guess it's part of that acceptance. It's funny, speaking of hate, have you, I mean, maybe not, but here in the city, there are lots of carts around. So I do see like
Mm.
the Jehovah's Witness carts out. And then one of their current posters says like how to break the cycle of hate. And it's like all these multiracial people lined up. It's probably their latest publication, but I just thought like, that's ripe saying anything about hate, because the hatred that you spread is the worst.
Oh, 100%. And yeah, and I kind of have this dream project. I'm not even going to put it out there, that if I do someday, will be really fun surrounding that and Jehovah's Witnesses, but we'll
Uh-huh.
see. I won't
Oh,
say
I'm
anything about it,
excited.
but
Okay. Okay.
um,
That'd be
because
good.
there's no reason that we couldn't sit down and break bread and be friendly to one another, is there? Other
Shouldn't
than
be.
their hatred of
Shouldn't
us,
be.
is there
Yeah.
any reason, like if they didn't know who we were, couldn't we just hang out and be cool?
Exactly. They wouldn't. Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
That's the irony.
So then, with everything that had happened to this point, and your mom, um, obviously struggling like most Jehovah's Witnesses to really accept you for who you are, um, where did you go from there? I mean, was that the end? Was that like the end of your all's relationship? Did you get this fellowship at some point? Well, was this the end of your JW relationship entirely?
At that point, more or less it was. Yeah. I was never disfellowshipped. At that point, there's more yet to come.
Okay.
But I wasn't disfellowshipped by that congregation in that instance, because I had like hard faded. I said soft earlier, but it is really like a hard fade. Just block everyone, stop going. Yeah, never heard from anyone again. My mother would send me the Watchtower and the Awake every once in a while in the mail and write a brief little note. But then there was this cycle of her sending me little cards, and I would never respond because I knew she didn't really want a response, and then, or she wouldn't know what to do with it, or it would make her feel conflicted. But then there was this cycle of her sending me things fairly regularly. I'm talking like once a month, once every 2 months. There were no phone calls, there was no messaging. And then after a while, I'd get a big long letter just being like, I can't be in touch with you, Daniel, etc., etc. I know you're not disfellowshipped, but you might as well be. You're leading a life that is displeasing to Jehovah. And I found one of those letters recently. It was when I was leaving Glasgow. I went through a lot of old letters from her. I've kept most of them for some reason. And it is basically that classic thing of like, I love you, but I love Jehovah more. And what you're doing is bad. And like, it displeases him. And I want to be on Jehovah's side. And it's weird how you can, even like those letters, I remembered them as being quite pleasant. I probably even like rephrased them quite pleasantly. But reading that again, I was like, whoa, this was harsh. Like, really, no love in it. Just like a cutting off type of thing. So, and it's funny actually, I hadn't mentioned this at all, but when I was 15 and my sister was 17, she left the cult and was disfellowshipped. And she was out of the religion for 5 or 6 years. So when I left, she was out as well, actually. But we didn't have much of a relationship at that point. I'd basically shunned her for years, having been a witness myself. But then, and she had quite bad mental health, so she would end up staying at our house sometimes because my mom still supported her through her health issues. But I had moments with my sister at home when I would see her the few times I did that, I mean, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, so I think a lot of her behavior was not really her fault, but there were some really weird instances where she had like attacked me verbally, And for I don't even know why, like really weird things. So even when I was out, she wasn't the first person I turned to, just because even though I knew she wasn't in the religion, that she we weren't very close regardless. But then turns out just within the year that I left, she went back. Her mental health issues had gotten really bad. Um, it's bizarre. I remember my mom saying that Abby was, sorry, that's her name. That's fine.
It's fine.
That's my sister's name, Abby. First time I've mentioned the name. But I remember my mom telling me that she was possessed by the demons when she was actually going through a psychotic episode. She thought she was being abducted by aliens, and that she was the king of the aliens and he had been transplanted into her. And I think it is scary seeing someone going through an episode like that, but it just again shows. And again, my mother had been through 10 years of psychotherapy herself, and she was so like well educated about mental health, at least pertaining to whatever she went through. But then my sister, who is diagnosed schizophrenic, my mom is convinced that she has a demon. Like, that is I remember hearing that. And I think this actually happened just before I was out. So we were still talking. But I just remember, I think even at that point, I really kind of tried to shoot that down, because I was like, no, like, you can't treat her illness like this. Like, it's so
You
irresponsible.
can't
And
pray schizophrenia away.
no.
She needs
But
help.
then, yeah. And again, I think this is the issue. It's this kind of, it's like you running back to your abuser, because my sister experienced a lot of awful stuff in that religion. And yeah, there were some things I don't want to get into, but there were also like accusations made against my father, and then she retracted them, and said it was all made up. But what really damaged her was her upbringing. I mean, I don't know what's inherent to her, like,
Sure.
what she inherited. But when she left, she was really like, she was a 17-year-old girl who was really alone in the world. And she had been through the trauma of my childhood, probably even more so because she was a few years older. She was 14 when we moved to Germany. She experienced her own abuse, like, and then she leaves this religion because she doesn't, just because she doesn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness doesn't mean she should lose everything, especially as a child, or young adult. And she started living a life that was very destructive, and engaging with substances also in a way that the doctor said really damaged her her mental health and her mind and her brain chemistry. So I guess what I'm just saying is, like, so she went away. She was a hurt person. She self-medicated essentially.
Mm-hmm.
She was abandoned. She had none of her, like, her whole support system was gone, bar my mother helping her physically at points. But she was never understood. She was never supported in like what she wanted to do in life. She goes off the rails. She ends up in like a psychiatric ward. And then she goes back to this religion that facilitated all of this, because she has been taught to believe that anything that goes wrong in her life is because she left Jehovah.
Mm-hmm.
And this same thing happens to me in my story as well. When if we had just had a healthy upbringing and been allowed to be who we are, not to say that there wouldn't have been problems, but I can imagine she never would have ended up in that situation. And it's just sad. And now she's still like, she's been back for about nearly 10 years now. And she lives like a nun, like
Well,
so
again,
strict and so devout. And
let's take a child, give them no healthy social skills, keep them away, teach them how to do nothing, abuse them, throw them into the world alone by withdrawing all family, all support,
mhm,
watch them flounder, and then say, see, you're floundering because you left us.
yeah,
No, ex-JWs witnesses often flounder because of you, not because they left you.
mhm,
Had they been given healthy tools and not taught to keep everybody at arm's length and taught to how to make friends and educated and all of these other things, well, then they might have gone off away from Jehovah and had a wonderful life. But
yeah,
yeah, it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. They create this, Jehovah's Witnesses create these outcomes because of the way they treat the people within and
mhm,
then blame the victim for what happened to them.
yeah, yeah.
Masterfully.
It's sad. It's
It's
sad.
really sad.
Um, and so she was kind of doomed to go back.
Many are.
Um, Yeah.
So is that what
So
happened to you? Is that you ended up going back?
we're about to get there
Okay.
actually. um, so my mom sends me the letter. I can't speak to you anymore. And she did that a few times, but at some point that was really it. And we weren't in touch for years after that. But my sister, the only one who's like quasi on my side at that point, goes back. So I'm like, okay, never mind. That's like someone I've lost at this point as well. And she wrote me such a self-righteous letter as well. I was like, oh my God. I still have it as well. I should reread it to remind myself. Um, or maybe not. But so I had some good friends. I think I've always made friends wherever I've gone. And so I've never been truly alone. I was at uni, I had friends there. I was working in a cafe part-time. I made friends there. So I didn't feel alone. And in a weird way, I didn't feel the void of my family. Um, I started like I think there were definitely behaviors that were a bit unhealthy, not inherently unhealthy, but I think romantically, I was seeking a relationship to replace
Sure.
the void of, even though in my head, I don't remember missing them or feeling sad about them, but I was seeking that in a relationship instead. And I dated a few different people and it never worked out. Although no, I had one long-term boyfriend, but I was attracted to him for all the wrong reasons, I think. And I was 21, he was 22. So we were just quite young and that ended quite after like 8 months or something. And then I dated for a while and did feel I felt sad in a way that I couldn't find someone, where looking back as like a 21, 22-year-old, I should have just been chilling and having fun. It's
Yeah, but
almost a
we're
bit,
looking for belonging.
yeah. And also, I think that idea of partnership, so many witnesses get married so young, and the
Mhm.
idea of this like lifelong partnership is really burnt into your mind. And not
Sure.
that can't work out for people, but I don't think it's a really healthy expectation in life. Like, there
Mhm.
is no the one. There are
Nope.
millions, billions of people, and you might meet someone who you get on with, and maybe not, or it might be great for a while and then it ends, and that doesn't mean that it was horrible. But I think I still actually had this overall perspective on relationships and partnership, that you find the one and
Mhm.
they are everything, and that's you sorted for life. And so many of the people I had known had been, as witnesses, met when they were in high school, and then they would date until they were 19 and then they get married, so I think that was actually kind of a reflection of what I thought life should be, even though I had let go of so much of the lifestyle, I still kind of, I guess it was dual. I thought that's what romance should be, but I also, I was longing for that connection as well. And then ultimately I met someone who came into my cafe, and he got my number from one of my workmates. And we ended up having a nearly 3-year relationship. And there's so much I could say about this relationship, but this person was abusive and awful. And it's funny because I had my misgivings about him very early on, but almost this like people pleaser element of me just felt like I'd already gotten into it and I couldn't let him down and like pull out, even though I had my doubts about our connection and just who he was.
It's
I
a
can't
repetition
diagnose
of the
anyone.
pattern.
Exactly, yeah. And I can't diagnose him, but from his behaviors, narcissistic, if not like sociopathic behavior, lying, cheating, stealing, assaulted one of our flatmates, very manipulative, very gaslighty. But I was so like wrapped up in it, and I loved him, and he was my world, and I felt safe with him even though he was a dangerous person. And again, it's just that cycle, you know, like my dad was a lot like that, and that's what I grew up seeing. And
Sure.
so yeah, spent almost 3 years with him, and the way I broke up with him was becoming a Jehovah's Witness again. So it was weird because I'd been through a really rough few years, and my felt like going back would solve all my problems, and they solved that problem
Well,
because
that's what they pitch you, right? I mean, being one of Jehovah's
yeah,
Witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses don't have
yeah,
problems, right?
no, of course not. And all my problems are because I left, obviously.
Sure.
Um, and where my sister like had this very different kind of like tragic tale, mine was like more presentable because I'd finished my studies and I had a job and I had friends, and you know my life was together in a way. But in relationships, that was kind of my, you know, I never got addicted to drugs or like alcohol, or but I got involved with especially this one really unhealthy person,
Mhm.
toxic person. And so it's weird. Someone witnessed to me on Instagram, like a friend of a friend's, and he didn't. Obviously, I wasn't disfellowshipped, and he was a musician. He was a pioneer. He was, as I found out, also like in the closet. And I just, at the time, I thought it was the biggest blessing in the world because he sent me a couple scriptures which I found so beautiful, and it felt like the first time that the Bible had ever resonated with me. And we spoke for about a week, and by the end of that week, I went to the local congregation and I said that I want to come back. So it was a very quick turnaround. And there were so many things at that time where I thought, oh, this is Jehovah's blessing. Like my my boyfriend at the time was away in London and I was on my own. So felt like I had all this time was a blessing, so I could sort this stuff out and like do all the thinking without pressure. And then we were moving into a new room in a flat in Glasgow, and it was through my friends. So then by the time I moved, I already knew that I wanted to break up with him. And again, I thought it was Jehovah's blessing because I was able to tell him, no, you're not moving in with me. We're breaking up and I'm doing this on my own. So there were all these things that in my head fell into place so nicely. But it's that like cognitive bias as well. It's like you're
Sure.
looking for things. And yeah, I ended up in a new congregation in Glasgow. I thought it was like the best congregation I've ever been in. And in ways it was like, on paper, there were some really nice people. It doesn't change that the way they're, that a lot about the way they live is really unhealthy, but it's hard because there's still some people there who like, I still dream about a lot, and like, who did, I think out of the kindness of their heart, did a lot for me and like did care about me. But
As
doesn't
long as you
change
were
the
there
fact that they're
doing what they
shunning me
wanted you to
now.
do, right?
Exactly. Well, I was about to say, it doesn't change the fact that they're shunning me now.
Sure.
So yeah, I was
So
back for, sorry.
did you, when you went back, did you have to confess your sins and get disfellowshipped or anything, or they just welcomed you back and let you do your
Well,
thing?
it was interesting. I thought I would have to be disfellowshipped and then start coming back. And I spoke to this elder, and he said, he was like, well, you've been unactive and like distance from the congregation for so long that if you return and like, if you break up with your boyfriend, you change everything, and you just like set the record straight now, then you can just come back. Like, it doesn't warrant a disfellowshipping, which again, I thought like, oh, I'm so grateful for this, like amazing. And so broke up with that guy, and that was it. I told them like, I'm gay. I've been in relationships. I've done anything you can imagine. Like, I've lived a worldly life for all these years, but I want to come back. And that was the answer. So happened very quickly, just getting back into it. I was even given privileges quite fast. Obviously my family were back in my life. So this is now suddenly, after probably 3 years of no contact to my family, they're all there again. 3, 4 years even. I was out for 5 years, but my mom stayed in touch for a while. So yeah, it was like my life was made, and like I felt like all the emotional turmoil from that relationship and whatever had happened, I could just put behind me. I'd also felt like I kind of become a person that I didn't really like in that relationship. Like, he was cheating on me and I found out, so I like went and cheated on him back, that type of thing. So I felt like I did things that I'm not happy I did, but that doesn't mean you need to become a witness again.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it was, and then like, yeah, this kind of led quite like a, on the surface, kind of blissful little Jehovah's Witness life for a few years. My family members came over to visit over the course of the next few years. They became really friendly with my hall. Yeah, and then the pandemic started, and I mean, I still had issues. I still really hated the way women were treated. I wasn't in denial about me being gay. Although I still, like, after all this time and all this experience, I was suddenly trying to like figure out if I could be bi again, which sounds so like messed up. Like, I tried that at 19, and now I'm back at 27 or 28. No, yeah, 26, 27. I'm trying to like figure this out again because I've put myself back into this place where it's required of me. That's the only way I can have a normal life. And yeah, I I would have spells where I would like download this gay dating app just so I could talk to people. And it usually wasn't even like, because I was quite exemplary. I wasn't sleeping with people. I wasn't like going out partying. I was being very good. But I would have these like dips where I would download the app and I would start talking to a guy. And then I was like, no, 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 no. And I shut it again and didn't use it for another 4 months. But it was, looking back, that was just me, like this part of me that was so desperate to just see the light of day. And like, it's just like sexual suppression, isn't it? Which,
Mhm.
and of identities as well. So I was trying to find ways,
The
But
authentic
anyway,
you is just wanting to come out, and it's not
yeah,
allowed there.
no. And I was aware, I had moments where I was like, why have I gone back? Like, I did after like the honeymoon period and the elation of being back in this like love bomby environment, as it became real again, it was tough. And one of the things that I never did, and I'm really grateful for now, is my close worldly friends that I'd had for all those years. I didn't cut any of them off. I probably kept some of them a bit more at arm's length. I didn't see them as much, but I would still catch up with old friends.
Good for you.
And yeah, but I felt guilty about that as well, obviously. But yeah, uh, I don't know, that whole chapter, I feel like we've been speaking for so long. I'm trying not to like flesh this out even more.
Sure, sure. We don't
Um,
need every
don't want it to be like a
detail
monster
for sure,
episode.
but
Yeah.
it is. So you've gone back. You're there. You're back for several years. You got your family again, which has to probably feels really good.
Hmm.
Um, so well, you're talking to me today, so
Yeah.
clearly things went south at some point there with the witnesses.
Yeah.
What obviously you were conflicted while you were back. What happened? What shook
Hmm.
that next chapter of witness life to its core?
Yeah. So there were these periods where I would talk to guys online. There was one instance actually where I went and met a guy. I went to his house, and it was funny because it was actually he was the one who said like no sex, like this is just like you can sleep over but nothing is happening, which probably I probably would have let something happen, which is quite weird for a worldly guy to say. Worldly, this stupid lingo, but it's just like
I know what you mean.
contextual. um so I stayed over at his place and we just like kissed and stuff, and I spent the night, but genuinely nothing happened. But I felt so guilty for so long. And for after 2 months I came forward about it, and I went to a really fresh, like new elder, and he told me, "Oh, don't worry, this isn't a disfellowshipping matter. You didn't do anything like sexual, so it's fine." Only for him to come back and be like, "Actually, I got that wrong. There's going to be a judicial committee, but it's fine. Don't worry." And it was hardcore. And that was the first judicial committee of my life. And I was interrogated and I was not believed. Um, Ultimately, it's weird, I felt emotional, but I did also have this feeling like I need to put the waterworks on for this to really prove my repentance. And I was privately reproved, and that was after me being back for like a year and a half, so that was kind of like the first like kind of crack in the foundation. But then I kept doing my thing, but I still had this constant sense of I don't belong. I know I'm gay. Who am I trying to fool? I'm approaching my late 20s and I'm just not, I have no life. Like that was the sense of it. And it's interesting looking back over like so much of the lyrics and poetry that I wrote at that time, because it's just everything's about that, whether I realized it or not. Like this metaphor of like, I have a song called Station, and it's just about, I'm stuck at the stations, don't know what I'm waiting on. Like this, like the train's left without me, stuff like that. So I was obviously very much frustrated. And I would revisit the apps regularly. The pandemic hit, all of a sudden we're like physically removed from the meetings and the brothers and sisters. Everything becomes like even drier. And I think that was the point where I slowly started checking out. It wasn't just the conflict in me. It was seeing things for what they were for the first time, like for whatever reason, like truly just sitting back and being like, "Hey, I'm bored. Like I don't want to be here." I guess going to the physical meetings, there were the trimmings of like seeing your friends and talking, and like
Oh
you
yeah,
could
Zoom is
give a talk. And
boring.
sorry.
That's a Zoom meeting would be boring.
Yeah, you should be grateful you never had
Next
to
level
experience
boring.
that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I know I would not
yeah.
have made it through that.
No. Well, yeah. Yeah. So that that all happened. But then I was still like, there were kind of young JW groups online who would do like Zoom art classes and stuff. And I felt like I was getting in with this really cool crowd from across England and the UK. So I was meeting all these new people. And in a way, I felt so excited to be meeting people that almost the kind of person that I'd always longed for throughout my life, like a creative, expressive, kind of alternative type Jehovah's Witness. Um, but then at the same time, I just felt what I said, like I was getting very disillusioned about the format because it was so flat, like both literally and like proverbially. And so I was distancing myself. At the same time, I met a sister in one of these chats, in one of these Zoom classes. And we hit it off really well as friends. But then she kind of started catching feelings. And again, I was back at this point where I'm like, well, maybe I can do this. We were involved for a few months. I don't have to tell the whole story, but I ended it. And I was honest with her initially. I said, like, look, I've been with men. I don't know if this will work, but we can give it a shot. But I ended up ending it. And I felt awful about that. But that for me, that relationship was like the last nail in the coffin in my hopes of like being able to be a normal Jehovah's Witness and like end up meeting a woman, having a family, etc. And after that ended, it was only a few more months until I left. So it was really, I didn't realize it as it was happening, but it was very pivotal. Um, we started reading the Old Testament again in the weekly Bible reading. And it was funny because when I went back to the congregation in 2017, we just started the Gospels, which are like the most palatable, like lovely kind of books in the Bible, maybe alongside some of the Psalms and Proverbs. But now we're like back in this like hardcore, really grim writing, and especially coming into like Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And it was the first time in my life since childhood that I actually read any of this, like consciously, like read it. And I was just like, who, who is this God? Like, he's crazy. Like, it was obviously like all like the rape and the killing and the pillaging, but then even things like animal sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't even from like a vegan or vegetarian perspective, but just like, why do you as a god desire people to like cover an altar in blood and like spatter that shit everywhere and get it all over your clothes? It's like, that's like psychopathic. Like, it's just gross. And there were, my picture of like Jehovah was like changing chapter by chapter. And along with this like growing resistance within me, like I just this really strong sense of like, I'm bored. I don't want to do this. I was also creating a new picture of Jehovah in my head. And it was just like, my sense was, I don't like this guy. And
No, if
then it
you read
started
those old
making sense.
stories and you read them with fresh eyes,
Yeah.
it's pretty rough.
Yeah. He's not great. And then I had this sense of either he is real and I hate him and I don't care. He can kill me, whatever. Kill me in Armageddon. I don't respect you. Or it's all made up. And in that case, it's also fine. And so I'd had this real departure. And, but I wasn't out yet. I met someone I hadn't left yet, but I met someone online and we really hit it off. And the first few dates, I didn't let anything happen because I was just aware I'm like, I'm not disfellowshipped. I'm still a witness technically, even though like mentally I was getting more and more distant. But then eventually, obviously something happened and I just really liked this person. And it was also just such a release, like for me, like emotionally and physically, like been suppressing so much about me for another 4 years. And now suddenly I'm being myself again. And I just felt like this storm was building though, because I knew what it would lead to. I liked them a lot, him a lot. And it went on for a few weeks and I messaged all the elders saying that basically like disassociating, saying I don't belong in the congregation. It's weird. The language looking back was very, I was still trying to like please them in what I was saying. I said like, I've been doing bad things. I don't belong in the organization. I have a very bad attitude at the moment. Maybe this will change in time, but for now, I basically was trying to end it. But some of my friends, once they got the message, they had a kind of intervention and they said they were really hoping I would stay in. They were really pressuring me to break things off with this guy. And they were also really hoping that I would go into a judicial and be repentant and stay in. So I buckled, basically trying to please them. Instead of actually disassociating, I went into one last judicial, but I just knew from the get it was going to be like a disfellowshipping because I wasn't sorry. I wasn't going to stop seeing him. So I was disfellowshipped again. And over the course of the last few weeks, I'd been speaking to my family as well. I'd started kind of with my misgivings, but then ultimately told them about the person I was seeing. So they knew. And there were many like final phone calls with each of my siblings and with my mother. And I met with some of my closest friends and told them what was happening as well. It was the first time I'd been disfellowshipped and like it felt very different. I remember speaking to my mom and it kind of felt like it was never going to end. She actually knew a witness who was a therapist, and that witness knew another witness who was a therapist who like specialized in gay brothers. And so I remember one of the last things was my mom coming to me and saying, well, look, this person is offering to give you free therapy. And that really pissed me off because I'm like, this is like, I'm not going to do Jehovah's Witness conversion therapy. And she was like, no, 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 that's not what it is. It's just someone who understands you. And I was like, no way. But then, yeah, I just told her no. I think she was upset, but it was fine. But to cut to the chase, one of the last conversations I had with her, at the very end of the conversation, she said in a very kind of like calm voice, like, Danny, I understand. Like, obviously she was about to shun me, whatever, but like looking back, that was so telling to me. And I feel like she'd never ever said anything to like even imply any kind of like doubt in the organization or her faith, and I don't know if that's what it meant, but like for one of the last things that she would have said to me to be like, I understand, and for it to actually say it like she meant it is interesting to me. I was leaving again, but yeah, I've kind of like held on to that for some reason.
Well, yeah, because I understand could mean a lot of things, I guess, depending on the
Yeah,
context. That she understood that you had to go be who you were, and that
yeah,
what you were fighting. Maybe she understood your disillusionment with other things, but
yeah,
maybe she was similarly disillusioned, but um
maybe,
couldn't leave because of her own reasons or whatever. Who knows?
yeah.
But
And
those
so,
conversations are really hard to have. And I mean, was that the last conversation that you had with her?
well, so I was just fellowshipped. I'll kind of like, because we're kind of getting there because something happened last year, which is like kind of
Okay.
bookends the story. But the month after that happened, like I woke up every morning with utter existential dread and like it was the first time I really had to face the idea of mortality. Like,
Oh yeah.
I still didn't know quite what I believed, but I knew I was out, and I was out for good. And I hadn't woken up yet. I had my doubts and my issues, but I hadn't woken up. And the first month was rough. Like, I thankfully had a job that I could go to. Like, I had friends to see, but it almost felt like being a teenager again, like waking up knowing I was gay. But it was like times 100, because it was like feeling like my whole future had like fallen out from underneath me. But over the months, I slowly started to like inform my own perspective on life and the world. I picked up a couple of Richard Dawkins books. He wrote The God Delusion, but I started with a smaller book by him called Outgrowing God, which is newer, but it's kind of like a summary of the God Delusion. And then I listened to some podcasts, one being, an audiobook, a book called Why Evolution is True. I just
Oh
found it
yeah,
on
that's a good
YouTube.
book.
Yeah. But just reading those 3 books, I was like, I don't believe any of this anymore. Like, it was so instantaneous and it felt very freeing. And it was actually interesting because I remember sitting in a cafe on my day off or something, and I had this sense of like, what do I believe? Like, I still feel stuck. I'm out, I'm disfellowshipped, it's over. But what do I believe? And there was a bookstore just around the corner on the street. And I was like, it still felt kind of wrong, like picking up a book that was apostate, as in like opposed, well, not apostate, but I guess opposed to the Bible and what it says. And it was funny because when I was in the bookshop, as I was buying the book, I saw a brother standing in the corner who I'd known from my old hall. And like,
Yeah.
obviously, that stupid superstition is like, is this a message from Jehovah that I shouldn't buy this book? But I was just like, fuck it, no, I need this. Thankfully, like, I was like, shut up, like, took the book, started reading it. But yeah, I'm glad that I identified the need to do that, because I think, as we said, like, a lot of time can go by. You're out, you're homo, you're disfellowshipped, you're whatever, faded, but you don't actually reckon with the foundation of all of this, you know? And then it took me a while to actually start listening to stuff like Shunned or your other podcast. I have another story. I'm going to try to keep it brief, but it's quite interesting. So my partner, his mom heard someone on the radio who was an ex-Jehovah's Witness artist and performer based in Bristol, the city I live now. My partner at the time was soon moving to Bristol to start a PhD. And so his mom told me and my partner about this person she'd heard on the radio, because there were these parallels, like, oh, a gay ex-Jehovah's Witness who's an artist, a lot like Daniel, and he's in Bristol where Eddie's moving. So that's my partner's name, is Sven. And so I reached out to him on Instagram and we hit it off. My partner moved here, they hit it off. We've become really good friends. And he left the organization because he was gay as well, and he'd really become disillusioned with everything. But his parents left after 2 years because they didn't agree with the way he was being treated. And the place I live now is one of their good friends as well. She's never been a witness, but when they come to visit Bristol, they stay here. And one of their first visits here, I remember speaking to them so much. I'd known their son for longer, but it was really interesting meeting these middle-aged people who left in their 50s. And like, you know, there's a lot of conditioning and stuff there to unpick. And that was, speaking to them motivated me to start engaging with apostate material online, because they were so like into it, and they were so, I don't know, they were obviously angry for a good reason, but that was finally the point where I felt ready to start engaging with ex-JW on Reddit, or listening to your podcast, or watching videos on YouTube. And that after having read the more secular, I mean secular as in like kind of less subjective to Jehovah's Witnesses, that literature, having read that and kind of filled in the gaps of like, okay, I don't think I believe in God. Okay, like evolution actually makes sense. Now I was engaging with things that validated my experience. You know, it wasn't just the knowledge, it was kind of the experience of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that it's a cult, because for so long I would have probably even defended it and said, as someone who was out, I did that the first time around. It was like, no, it's like, it's just a religion. Like they're living by the Bible. It's not for me, but I defended it so much in the past. And it was like, this is a cult, like actually. And it's not just like a word we're throwing around, like read those lists describing cults, like read like the Fog kind of, you know, and that was very freeing. And I still engage obviously with that content, less so now. Like it was quite intense last year. That was where it kind of like started. Now like I like to keep in touch, and I still like listen to your episodes, and I'll check Reddit every once in a while, but for a while it was very like
That's
concentrated.
normal.
But I
Everybody
needed
goes
that.
real hard for a
Yeah,
while, for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And over the last few months has now been my period to like learning, because you don't have to speak about it and you don't have to become an activist. And
Mm-mm.
that's not really my pursuit, but I'm seeing the value in like sharing my story. My mother had always had health issues. And I got a call from my brother early last year, started 2021. So about a year ago, saying she'd gone into hospital because of a heart issue, and that she needed open heart, but it might involve blood, and that she might not survive. So I kind of like held my breath, but she ended up having the surgery and she came out fine. But then 2 months later in March, I got basically the identical message or call saying, Mom's back in hospital. Her heart's gotten bad again. It looks like she won't survive. She probably needs another surgery. She'd already had 2 open heart surgeries at this point, and it would involve a lot of blood. She's obviously not going to take blood. She also had COVID at the time. And like, I think, no, she got COVID after her first operation, and it put a lot of strain on her heart because of the chest infection and the coughing. And ultimately, she would have needed another surgery, probably under or with a blood transfusion to survive. And she wasn't going to have that. And so she ended up passing away in March, which was
Of 22 or 21?
2022. I said 2021, but
Oh,
it was
okay.
2022. I'm still I'm thinking, yeah, I forget we're in
Oh, the pandemic has messed up all timelines.
Yeah.
So I get it.
So it's only, yeah, she passed away 9 months ago. And that
Wow.
was,
Sorry to hear that.
thank you. In a way, it just felt like, oh, this is like just the next part of this whole crazy story, you know, like another kind of tragedy. But it hurt that we hadn't been in each other's lives for about a year, because I was disfellowshipped about a year before. But I'm also really glad that I left when I left, because I feel like if I'd still been in and she would have died, I think that puts a whole nother hook in you, you know.
Resurrection hook?
Yeah, exactly. And I almost hate it for my siblings, because they're all in, and then they're smart people. Like, I think I would hope that someday they would start to see the things that I saw. But I know that just the hope to see my mother again is probably very strong for them. But yeah, I had one last conversation with her. When I got the news in March, the doctors thought she would pass away within days. So I had a conversation with her that weekend, but she held on for another 2 weeks. And because I would have gone over to see her one more time from the UK, but I thought she'd be gone in 2 days. So I didn't go. And I was still it sounds awful to not want to see your dying mother, but there was also a level of protecting myself and knowing what I would be subjected to going there.
Nothing
So
wrong with that at all.
I was in two minds as it was, but the time limit kind of made the decision for me. But then when she held on for another 2 weeks, with every kind of day that passed, I felt bad that I wasn't going. But I never went to see her. My sister would send me messages on her behalf. Kind of first they were just updates, but the last message ever conveyed to me from my mother was, "Please come back," which is quite torturous. That, like, it was actually your episode with Heath I was listening to today. His dad's dying wish was come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I understand the sentiment, but it's incredibly selfish, and it
Oh yeah,
totally undermines all of my decisions, everything I've gone through, my experience. I mean, that month before I got disfellowshipped, I told her so much about how I felt, what I'd experienced, homophobia I'd experienced in the congregation. And as much as it hurt thinking that, like, she wants to see me again, it also hurt to realize that she still hadn't understood.
it's
So
one last manipulation of a vulnerable person. It's one
yeah,
last using of the pain and everything to
yeah,
try to, again, desperately plead for what they want. And I understand that. And
yeah,
I have compassion for a parent who would die in that cult induced state.
yeah.
But um that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt the people who survive
No,
on the
no,
other end. And it's
yeah,
not fair. It's
yeah.
not fair at all. None of it has ever been fair.
No, no. And I guess it makes sense that it kind of ends that way.
It
In her
does.
defense, like, I think she was very weak, and I think she was a bit delirious. But then she probably would have said that even if
This is
she'd
a
been a
common
full,
thing that
yeah,
happens.
yeah,
This happens all the time to people.
yeah,
It's a very, very common thing. Jehovah's Witnesses are going to Jehovah's Witness. This is what they do.
yeah.
They try to get people to
Till
be
death.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
It's everything they do.
Mm.
So there's always that undertone. And so, yeah, it only makes sense if you're a Jehovah's Witness parent, you've got a child who's out, you're gonna, this is the last chance. So you're
Yeah,
gonna do what you do because this is just what you do and a byproduct of who you've been.
yeah. And I'm still processing all of that, like, in regards to our relationship, but I found a lot of peace
Mm-hmm.
with, again, back to that story from the beginning. She was 4 years old. She was being neglected. Jehovah was her best friend. Like,
Yep.
she had a tough life. Like, it was hard, and she was strong, and I think she made many mistakes raising me, but I'm also grateful for who she made me in ways, I mean, I can take credit for who I am as well. It's obviously not just my
Good.
parents, but, like, I still love her, and I can compartmentalize her conditioning and who I can still see through that,
Sure.
and even also just, like, the idea of who she would have been without the cult, because I think she would have had an amazing life. Like, she was very creative. She spoke 3 languages. She played the piano. She loved people. Again, she was such, like, a preacher, which, again, like, was such a waste of time and so misplaced, because she could have done such good things for people. 'Cause she would witness to anyone, anywhere, on a train, on a bus, at the supermarket, going for a walk.
And her intent was good.
Yeah,
Her
yeah.
message was
No, I
bad,
believe,
but her
yeah,
intent was good.
yeah, yeah.
She
And
thought she was
so
helping.
like, I'm definitely it's a long process, healing, just as much as like healing from this cult is. Like grieving and mourning and death is different, but is a similarly kind of long process, I think. And I'm still doing that, but I found a lot of peace. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, healing is a process, not an event. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
I say this all the time. I get people who come to me at times and they're like, "Well, I'll work with you a time or two, and we'll see if how I'm feeling or whatever." And I said, "Well, hey, like I am happy to work with you. You can cancel working with me at any time. You are in no way captive to working with me.
Uh-huh.
But um, but this isn't learning the truth in six. Healing is not learning the truth in 6 months by studying the knowledge book, where you
No.
now have all the answers to everything that has ever been, is today, and will ever be in the future. Healing takes time. You can't erase it in 2 hours. It doesn't happen.
No.
You will be in different points of your life and different seasons, and you will see things differently based on who you are at those times as well. And just, again, back to all the hooks and trying to understand all the players in the game here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that went on. It's very complex. It affects us in many ways, and we have to learn a lot of tools and learn how to use those tools, when to bring them out, to have better relationships with others and ourselves, and find work that is suits us, and be able to express ourselves and actually love ourselves, and
Yeah.
all these different things that were kept from us. And this
You just start from the ground up again, really.
You have to.
Like, yeah. It's like a fish out of water. You have to
can't
learn to
start in the
breathe,
middle.
and yeah. But it feels good. Like,
Yeah.
as much as it's scary, and like, that first month where I thought like I'm gonna die one day, oh my God.
Believe
The
me, I was
freedom is
there. I get
amazing.
it.
Yeah. But yeah, so
So now,
yeah.
so you officially left Jehovah's Witnesses in what year?
I
20.
was just fellowshipped in June of 2021.
Okay.
But I
2021. And
start
then,
yeah, sorry. And I got in trouble a few months prior.
okay.
Not even a month and a half. So it's
So
quite
June
quick.
2021, you're disfellowshipped. And then when
Yeah.
do you start looking? Because, there's the leaving for behavioral reasons, let's say.
Uh-huh.
Though it's not like that's all there was with you. But
I think it
then
was a bit of
there's
both. Yeah.
being able to look at, let's say, apostate material and start
Mhm.
to be free enough to explore the realities of everything you had been involved in. When did you start doing that?
So the books that I mentioned, I picked up within a couple of months.
Okay.
Maybe 2-3 months. I think one thing that also helped me before I even started reading is I'm friends with someone who's they're like queer ex-Jehovah's Witness, and virtually all of their family is in my old hall. And I had met them because I used to work in fashion while I was at art school, and I had met them at a fashion event, and we connected because we were both ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. I go back, I meet their family. Again, I even still saw them for walks, which was like risky business. But like when I was back, I was becoming friends with their family. Then I leave again, and we had stayed in touch, but not closely. And all of a sudden, like they were a very valuable person for me because they understand that whole trajectory. They know I know their family. They know the context. They know the people, the congregation. And they're just brilliantly unapologetic. Like they taught me to call it a cult because they would just say it so confidently and like just dismiss all the BS so confidently. And so I feel like spending time with them, especially once I was disfellowshipped myself, that really helped me. And I think that kind of primed me or prepared me to finally check out the literature. And then I'd say it was another good like 6 months until I started listening to apostate podcasts, Reddit, YouTube. So it was quite a process.
Yeah. So even that is a process, right?
Yeah.
It all is.
Yeah.
Today, in your life today, do you have any contact with like your siblings, or like what happened to your dad? Did he
No.
just, I mean, was he just out of your life for a long time anyway? So when you got
Yeah.
disfellowshipped, it was like whatever? Or, I mean, do you have any contact with anybody, or?
So my dad, I'm fully estranged from him. And that was
Gotcha.
even as I was still a witness. Last time I spoke to him was in 2007 when he gave me the
Mm.
laptop. 2008 was the last time I saw him, but that was that instance where we walked out the house. He was standing there. We got in the car, drove away. So last time I actually spoke to him was 2007. So that was even as a witness, still we were estranged. He would not touch me with a barge pole now, being like this disfellowship
Gotcha.
gay out. So that relationship is, for me, even when I was still a witness, it was very much a let sleeping dogs lie type thing.
I get it.
I think it would be more upsetting than valuable. I feel like, I don't think he ever changed because he never demonstrated that. He had four kids in Germany that left in 2004. That's 19 years ago, So that's over. My siblings, I was in touch with the youngest for just over the course of my mom's kind of hospitalization and what was going on. And then as soon as she passed away, it was my second brother, who is closer to me in age, who's also more like he's married, he's a ministerial servant, all this stuff. So he was kind of taking on this head of the household type of persona. Again, he only called me to tell me that she had passed away and that he'd be in touch about the funeral. My sister had relayed messages from my mother, but she hadn't really said much to me. So I'll basically no, we'd not been in touch much. The funeral was just on Zoom, and it was a travesty. It was one of the most, I don't get angry, but I was fuming at this memorial talk. It was, and I mean, we all know the format regardless, but
Oh yeah.
it was a really,
Sales pitch for the cult.
it's the most disrespectful way to pretend to reflect on someone's life. It's gross. And even in like the 5-minute synopsis that she was given on her life, they made her sound like a poorly, weak, vulnerable woman. They made it sound like it was great that she had died because she'll wake up and everything will be better. And they didn't give her credit for any of the amazing things that she'd done in her life. And I wasn't mentioned once throughout the whole talk. They mentioned all my siblings by name and my sister-in-law by name, who my brother's only been married for now, probably for about a year. So at that point, it was a few months. So they mention my 3 siblings, they mention this woman, and they say other friends and family. And that's not just once, that's like 5, 6, 7 times that this happens. Awful. I get a message from my brother about 10 minutes before the talk is ending saying, "Is there anything you'd like me to say on your behalf?" This is 10 minutes before it ends. I didn't reply. I was like, how disrespectful is it to ask this of someone? Not just to ask to say something on their behalf. Like, I should arguably be able to speak at my mother's funeral. But also not to give her or me the respect to just ask that in advance. And then at the end, all my siblings speak and they're crying on camera. And I'm just sitting there like, it's a shame as well, because I couldn't take that moment to mourn my mother. I was just filled with rage as to how things were conducted. And I messaged my brother after saying that should not have been organized during the talk. That should have been asked of me. If not that morning than days before, you know. And the fact that I wasn't given a platform to speak myself is also like, I was infuriated about so many things, and
Oh, it's disgusting.
it's awful. Yeah, it's true. That's exactly how I described it. Like, this is disgusting. I remember saying, like, this was not a Jehovah's Witness meeting. I don't care who's there. This was about her and who she's left behind. And after I spoke my mind, he blocked me on WhatsApp. My sister blocked me because I'd said similar things to her. And then, so that was them. That was the last time I engaged with them in March. So 9 months ago. And Benji, I never spoke to him about the funeral, but I messaged him, I think, the following week. There were a few things of my mom's that I would have liked to have if he could be bothered to give them to me. And I wanted to also offer to go help with the house if he needed it. He never replied. And so that was that. And I've not spoken to them since. So
It's really, as you're speaking about this, it's just striking me. We don't get a funeral. We died to them
instantaneously.
And there's no, might be an announcement at a Kingdom Hall or something that we're no longer Jehovah's Witnesses, but we're dead to them and we don't get a funeral.
No.
There's, you know, we just stop existing and nobody talks about it. You know, just like you not being mentioned. It's interesting. My mom called me from my dad's funeral, which I was not invited to. This was pre-pandemic, so it was held at the Kingdom Hall, and asked over the phone, "Can we use your name as, like, I guess one of the surviving children or whatever?" And I said, "Well, like it or not, I'm still his son." So feel free to use the name if you want, or don't if you don't. Like, I mean, what kind of dumb question is that?
Isn't it?
And it's like, yeah, I mean, why would you not use my name? In fact, I am named after him, something that I hate to this day, but I'm named after him. And so, like, yeah.
So like a junior.
Yeah, I'm a junior. Yeah, so you're going to be using my name anyway. Just throw the junior on there and admit I still live. I guess if you want to pretend I don't exist, fine, whatever, do what you want. I don't, you know, I mean, at this point, they don't really exist to me, but, you know,
well, I think that's the other side of it. Like, they don't get a funeral either. Yeah. You know, from us, like, and I think, it sounds really harsh, but I don't miss those people because
me neither
of how conditional it is. And if they ever change what they believe, I want it, because lots of people say, like, oh, if they ever want to, my arms are wide open. I'm here, I'm waiting. But I think I would be very tentative to let them back into my life.
Well, even actually, I think I kind of said that earlier, like, my door's open, I'm still here. Like, okay. Yeah, you're welcome to come and we'll talk. And but you know, I'm not gonna immediately turn you away. Like, you gotta go do some work on yourself before we can have any kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And it's not up to me, the person who's been abused by you, to be there to make that happen. So you run off, and I hope you can get some therapy and figure some things out. And then, you know, and I'd be happy to have some healing conversations in that context, but I am not, you know, I don't know. It just depends. I think my siblings are different than my mom, and, like, it's just all different. And everybody has to decide what they could handle or would be willing to. Again, I'm willing to have some conversations. I'd probably open my arms to my siblings more than my mom.
Yeah.
More easily.
Yeah.
Because I see them as similar victims to me. My mom was too, but there's a different power dynamic there, and there's a whole.
Yeah.
So, you know, as long as it's healthy, and we can have that. But
Uh-huh.
if it starts not being healthy, then real quickly we can go back to the way it was.
And I think one of the things is as well, when you are like banished and shunned, you start from zero. You have to find friends. You have to reconstruct your whole social group. Sometimes that goes wrong. Sometimes you welcome way too many people into your life.
Sure.
You don't know how to approach that, but you do learn with time to be you select who enters your life.
Yep.
And growing up, we never had control over that. We were just like exposed to whoever was around us in the congregation. And I think equally with family, like it's that like water runs thicker than blood. What's the saying? Like,
Blood is
I
thicker
don't
than
believe,
water.
yeah, I don't believe that. Like, I think family are people like any other people, and they need to prove that they deserve a spot in your life, especially after they've hurt you.
Well,
And as with my father, like, just because created me does not mean that you belong in my life. And
let's
yeah,
take some of the magic away from it. He didn't create you.
no, I
He
know.
had
Yeah, yeah,
sex, something he
yeah.
was gonna do
He probably
anyway, and
didn't want to. Yeah.
like we happen to be the biological byproducts of that, but because we kind of like mystify and like add almost deify parents at times,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly there are wonderful and amazing parents out there, and I want that for everyone, but it not going to happen, but I wish that for everyone. But at the end of the day, uh for those of us who were abused in these ways, spiritually, physically, not physically, but mentally and emotionally at a minimum. Some other people may have had physical or sexual abuse,
Mm-hmm.
tagged onto that. It's when people I talk to people all the time, and it's like, well, but their mom, my mom, or my dad. And I'm like, well, I know they only abuse you mentally and emotionally and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
spiritually, but like if they abused you sexually, would you still go hang out with them? Oh no, oh no. Well, why
Yeah.
is this
Where'd you draw the
different?
line? Yeah.
Like it's still abuse. It's just
Damage.
that we
Yeah.
see those types of abuses in different ways, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't really add the levity to those things that they perhaps deserve.
No.
And also because we were taught not to love ourselves, we could take it. I mean, what's a little, you make me feel bad about myself, whatever. I don't care about myself
Yeah.
anyway. So
I
whatever,
think
right?
once you've learned, because surviving like Jehovah's Witnesses, if you get it right and you really figure it out, you have like a low tolerance for bullshit,
Yes.
and that's really valuable. It takes work, but I feel like you've had to put up with people that you never would usually ever choose to spend any time with, and your whole life is controlled. And if you've made it out of that, like you and your life becomes your own, you proceed in a very like selective, decisive way, hopefully.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
We can still accept all types of different people, but we
but
don't
you
have
let
to put
them.
up with abuse anymore.
No,
And that's
yeah,
part of loving ourselves well.
yeah,
Just like I wouldn't be excited to watch my wife be abused by somebody or treated badly by a friend or whatever the case. I'm not going to let myself be treated that way either. We all have to,
mhm.
I mean, obviously we're all imperfect. We all do step on each other's toes at
Yeah,
times.
of
That's
course,
part of
yeah.
life. But,
Hmm.
if you're a habitually abusive person, the chances of you lasting very long in my life are going to be pretty low because
Hmm.
there's 8 billion people on this planet and I can find somebody else to hang
Yeah,
out with.
yeah. And I didn't
Um,
get that right the first time around with like the people I got involved with, but I think I'm doing a much better job now,
again,
thankfully.
that's a process
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So let's end this today then on where you are today.
Yes.
So what do you like about your life today? What is good?
I'd say it's all pretty good. Like it's not
Doesn't mean perfect, but what do you like
exactly what's
about the life that you have now? What do you appreciate or have gratitude for in it? And are there any things that you are, do you have some hopes and dreams or anything like that that you're working on?
yeah, it's funny because my last 3 years in Glasgow, I lived in this beautiful one bed flat that I had like I didn't own it, I was renting it, but I'd worked quite hard to like get there, get that apartment and like furnish it really nicely. It was everything was just so um but I had created that as a Jehovah's Witness because I was trying to create this little like perfect world for myself because there was so much that I didn't have. And obviously after I was disfellowshipped, I stayed there for a while. Um I'm I'm still with the same person I met almost 2 years ago. And I'm very grateful for that relationship. They're a really wonderful person. And like it's
Awesome.
funny, I can't like I don't get emotional talking about my family, but like about them, like yeah, I'm really grateful that they're in my life. And it's just a good relationship. Maybe the first I've been in. Um and yeah, so we were long distance for a while after they'd moved to Bristol, and I eventually decided I needed to go to Glasgow. It was where I had left the witnesses, gone back, left the witnesses. There was too much. My toxic ex was there. I'd been there for 10 years. I decided I need to take the leap. And so I moved down here. I think after my mom's death as well, that was another element where I was like, I remember my family in this apartment. There's all these things. So I moved here. I moved out of this lovely like one bed apartment all on my own to come live in this house share with two other people. I have like a tiny little space to live in, but I'm so much happier. And I think that's the thing on paper. My life maybe materially has gone backwards a bit in what I imagined I wanted out of life. But I live with two lovely people, one of which is my partner, and I'm in a new city which is full of creative opportunities. I've been performing, as I said, my music and doing queer performance art. I did an exhibition a couple months ago with this other ex-JWs witness artist, and we had a discussion panel about our upbringing and what we've been through. I've got my own art studio. Everything's going quite well, and it's taking time, and I have goals, and I'd like to be a bit more stable with my work and not have to worry about money too much. But I'm just gonna keep going, and I'm picking up the pieces still from losing my mother, and even just those first kind of 28 years of my life. But I feel good. I'm happy.
Good. Well, I'm happy
Yeah.
for you. And
Thanks, Mike.
so let me ask, I mean, you didn't come to me with this, but just because you talked about your performance, your art and everything, do you have like a website or anything where your art is, where anybody who was curious might want to look at it could?
Yeah, of course. So I'm quite active on my Instagram, which is Daniel DeWolf, which I don't know if we can link it. It's DanielDewolfe.
Okay. I'll link that in the show notes.
Amazing. And danieldewolf.com is my website, which is more of just a kind of portfolio. But also on my main Instagram, which is more visual art, I have tagged my performance kind of concept, which is drawn by DeWolf. So the idea is that I am a character that I have drawn. So the name is Drawn. Yeah, those are the main
Cool.
places. I'm hoping to get some of my actual music out there soon. I've got bits spread across the internet from over like the last 5, 6 years, but that's one of my goals now going into this new year is to get a few projects put out there so people can really have a proper listen to what I'm doing now.
Well, that's awesome. One of the things I love seeing is people, it's like creative types who are reined in by the cults and family and everything, be able to, I mean, isn't it learning to be authentic and to be able to express that authentic self is one
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
things that we all have to do. as part of our healing. And I'm glad that you get to do that. I'm glad that you shared this. I will share this again in the show notes. I'll link it up.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'm just glad you shared all of this. I think that this was a very deep, thoughtful conversation, and
I've enjoyed
appreciate that, because I think a lot of people will benefit from it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been good.